This video is brought to you by ElevenLabs. Thanks to them for helping me share resources like this with the community. Building AI apps usually feels overwhelming. How do you connect the voice, save user sessions, or let the agent actually interact with the device? Today I'll show you how we can pull all of that together into a complete mindfulness application built with React Native. We'll use Clerk for authentication with Google and email. And thanks to Expo Router's new protected routes, the authentication flow stays super clean by neatly separating public and private screens. We'll use Appwrite to store user sessions and ElevenLabs to power the conversational AI with both client and server tools. And because looks matter, we'll also craft a beautiful UI using React Native Reanimated and Skia. Hey, if you're new here, I'm Beto. I work as a developer success engineer at Expo, and I'm also the founder of Code with Beto, where I share premium resources like my React Native course and other content to help you build better apps faster. Let me show you what that experience feels like in action, and then we'll break down how to build it step by step. This is the home screen. By default, we have a feature session, and we have really nice animations using Reanimated like this one right here. You notice that. So if I go to session, if we go back, we have now a different session, sunrise sky. We have the reasons and also other sessions, right? Could be that the user wants to try something new, so they have many things to choose from. Here we have my recent sessions, and then I also have my account. As you notice, we sign in with Google, so we can sign out. We also have the ability to sign in with email, sign up with email, and even reset password. All that was easily integrated using Clerk components, and we're going to learn how to use them in this video. So let's quickly sign in again with Google. I'm going to choose my account, continue. For this session. So let's start.
Hey Beto, whenever you're ready, let's gently begin ocean waves.
Hey, I'm ready.
All right, let's begin. I'm setting the brightness to 0.1 to create a more relaxing atmosphere. Now, let's get a quote to set the tone for our session. Originality is the fine art of remembering what you hear, but forgetting where you heard it. Lawrence J. Peter. Let's embrace the present moment, allowing thoughts to drift like
Awesome,
waves
thank you so much. Can you set the brightness to 0.8?
Sure thing. I can set the brightness to 0.8. Okay, I've adjusted the brightness to 0.8. Is there anything else I can adjust for you?
Sorry, that's too bright. Let's put it again to 0.1.
No problem at all. I'll adjust it to 0.1. Is that better for you?
Yes, that's better. Thank you. And now go ahead and fetch a new quote, please.
You got it. Let me get a new quote for you. We're responsible for everything that happens to us. Yanni. This reminds us that we have the power to navigate the waves of life
Great,
with intention and mindfulness.
By the way, I forgot to ask you, can we do this session in Spanish?
Por supuesto. Podemos continuar esta sesión en español.
Ok, muchas gracias. Ya vamos a terminarla. Okay, so as you notice there, I have a little warning there. But the agent has the ability to end the session. Now I have here a button to refresh. Alright, and after a moment, as you notice there, now we have the session. A title, and then like a short description that the agent created for me. And then we have the transcript. So at the end, I can save this in Appwrite, my database. So if I save and continue, now I have this little refresh icon button here. Let's press it. And now, if I scroll down, we have our latest session. So I can read about it, come back to it. So all that thanks to ElevenLabs, and then the authentication was seamless to integrate using Clerk components, and saving data with Appwrite is easier than ever. Let's get back to the video. All right, now that we've seen what's possible, let's talk about how we are going to build this step by step. For authentication, we're going to integrate Clerk, giving us email and Google sign-in, password resets, and confirmation flows out of the box. And to keep things clean, we'll use a new modern pattern introduced in Expo Router version 5. It's called protected routes. This lets us group public and private screens, and all we have to do is pass whether the user is authenticated or not. The router handles the rest. For storing data like user sessions and history, we'll use Appwrite, a flexible and easy to integrate database great for persisting the user's sessions so that if the user changes device, they will always have their history and sessions. And powering the AI agent itself is ElevenLabs, which provides both client-side tools to control the device itself and server-side tools to fetch external data. But it's not just about functionality. We're also going to craft a beautiful UI with advanced animations using React Native Reanimated and React Native Skia. On the home screen, you'll see a feature session with rich image and subtle zoom effect as you scroll. It's that classic immersive feel when you pull down the image stretches slightly, and as you scroll up, it zooms back in. It's a small touch, but it makes the application feel polished and alive. We'll also add an animated radial gradient component. It grows from a small circle to fill the background. And when the agent is speaking, it will pulse smoothly, giving users real-time visual feedback. These gradients can be positioned top or bottom depending on the design, and the effect opens up a lot of creative possibilities. So in this tutorial, it's not just about writing everything together. It's about building something that feels robust and production ready, while also looking delightful and modern. By the end, you'll have the exact experience you saw in the demo, but also the knowledge to customize it for your own applications. I'm really excited. Let's dive in. Okay, I'm excited to start this project, guys. And the first thing that we need to do, since we're going to be using React Native, is create a new React Native application. So I'm in my terminal inside the tutorials folder, and I'm going to be using bun. So you can run bun x create expo app, and I'm just going to hit enter like that. This is going to actually use the default template, and then it's going to ask me the name of my application. So we're building a mindfulness application, and we're going to call it Numa. And this is because Numa has some significance with mindfulness rooted in breath, presence, and inner calm. And ChatGPT told me that. I don't know if that's true, but anyways, we're calling it Numa. I like it because it's short. In my case, I'm going to call this tutorial and hit enter. This is going to create my application using Bun, which is a package manager. And that's ready, as you can see there. So now we can see into the new folder called Numa tutorial and hit enter. Now we are inside this project and we can open it in VS Code. I can run code. Since I already installed this command that you can install in your computer using VS Code, and this will open VS Code for me. Okay, and we have our brand new Expo application. The next thing that I want to do is reset this project, since already has navigation and a bunch of stuff that it could be hard for people that are not familiar with React Native to dive into this project. And if we open the package JSON, you'll notice that we have many scripts available by default in this template, and we are going to run the reset project one. So let's open our terminal by pressing Command J, and now I'm going to run that script using bun. So we're going to run reset project just by saying bun, reset project, and hit enter. Now this will ask me if I want to, instead of deleting the components that come with this template, if I want to create a new folder called example, app example. In this case, I'm going to say yes, and just so that we all have a better understanding of what's happening later, because we're actually going to reutilize one of these components and I'm going to copy it later. So as you notice there, now we have this folder app example, and it's being ignored by GitHub. But now my app looks very clean. It's just a layout and an index screen with a simple text. Awesome. This is what I want, honestly. So let me clear the terminal. I'm going to say clear, hit enter. And now let's open this application, or let's run this application on my simulator. I'm going to start the server by saying bun start, or you can say npx expo start. All right, now we are using Expo Go. Notice that it's good for now because we're just getting started, but soon we're actually going to need to create a development build. And the reason for that is because we're going to be using some dependencies that require native code for ElevenLabs integration, and we need to create a development build since Expo Go does not support custom native APIs. So let's just for now open this in Expo Go to make sure that the project is working. I'm going to press I. This will open my iPhone 16 Pro, and let me bring it here. And that's how it looks. Very simple stuff so far. Let's change the text to make sure that this is working. When I say Numa, command save, and we get hot reloading. Awesome, this is working amazingly fine. Now, the first thing that I want to do is integrate Clerk, since we are going to have, custom agents for mindfulness for specific users. We need to somehow track the usage and allow only registered users so that we can have their email, their ID, and based on that, we can create records in our database with Appwrite and also handle every other custom logic that we need. So let's start with Clerk integration. So for that, actually, I'm going to be using, of course, Clerk. Let's go to the website. In case you're not familiar, Clerk is a solution or a company that offers authentication as a service, right? And they have an amazing integration and support for Expo and React Native applications. And we're going to be using them. They are very easy to implement, but there's actually a limitation. So actually, if you are familiar with Clerk at the moment, they provide a very nice developer experience when you are creating a website, specifically with Next.js. They give you components by default, so you don't have to write your own UI all the time. And React Native is a bit more complex since we have native implementation. The components change a little bit, but I have great news for you guys because we're going to be using Brian's components. Brian, he actually works at Clerk, and he's been working on some amazing components. I'm going to show you the repo here. It's called Clerk Expo UI. So what is Clerk Expo UI? It's a UI component library for Clerk authentication in React Native and Expo applications. So the piece that we were missing to have that seamless developer experience and following best practices as well. So this package provides ready-to-use UI components for authentication flows in Expo application using Clerk. This is great. Now, you can learn more about this project. By the way, this is work in progress, but we'll come back to the dependencies that we need to install in a moment. I just want to highlight that at the moment, we can already use email authentication with password, email, and verification code. And here we have as well the roadmap. He's planning on integrating Magic Link later, username, password. And by the way, if you want to contribute to this amazing project, he's accepting contributions, and you can even contribute by just reporting bugs. And if you find anything that is missing, just come here and create an issue. That's a good way to contribute as well, by the way. So we're going to be using this Clerk Expo UI. And by the way, I want to give a shout out to Brian Morrison. He's the creator of this amazing project. This is not officially maintained by Clerk. This is just a side project, but I think it's worth taking a look. And also I think it's ready for integrating in your application. I've tested it and it works amazingly fine. So enough talking. Make sure to follow Brian, by the way, and let's start implementing Clerk with Clerk Expo UI. So the first thing that you need to do, of course, is create an account if you haven't already. So you can come here and create an account. I already have mine, so I can just go to my dashboard. Another really nice thing about Clerk is that you can use it for free. Once your app gets traction, then you can start paying. I think you get 10,000 free users, which is awesome, right? So let's go ahead and create a new project for this video. I'll press this button, create application, and I call this one Numa. By the way, notice that we get a preview of the UI on the right, and the Expo components that we're going to be using, they are going to use this name as well. So make sure that you are using the correct one. We can call it Numa app or just Numa. I think just Numa is great. I'm going to enable email and Google by default and create application. So from here, you can select the framework that you're using. Of course, we can just select Expo, and this is going to guide us on what we need to get started implementing our own custom authentication with Expo. But instead of doing that, let's go back to the Clerk Expo UI. Once we've created our project here, we're actually going to be using it. Now, just make sure that you have selected the project that you're going to be using. And by the way, I just noticed that I have two NUMAs, so I'm going to call this one video, like that, and save. Okay, so now I have NUMA and NUMA video, perfect. Okay, so next thing, before we leave the dashboard, I want to go to the configuration. On the left, you'll find native applications right here. So click on that and let's enable our native application. It is enabled by default, native API. This will allow your iOS and Android application to connect. So we can actually leave this blank for now. We can come back to that later. But if you already have a bundle identifier and an Apple developer ID, team ID, you can just enter them here, and that's all the configuration that you need. But another important thing that I want to do here is add the redirect URL. This is important because when we are using Auth with Google or SSO authentication, we need to redirect back to our application. So the way we handle redirecting back to our application is by using the app scheme. If you open your app.json, this is the configuration of your app, and you'll find this app scheme. This is the kind of like the link that we need to do for that we need to use for our application. So I'm going to copy this scheme. You can change this if you want before you create a development build, but I'm going to be using just this for simplicity. So let's come here and put it there. Now, when we are deep linking into our application, we need to say : and this will open actually my application once I create a development build. And I can actually show you that by coming here. And let's create a development build. So that's the first thing that I'm going to do by running npx expo install expo dev client. This dependency will make sure that the next time that I start my server, it's going to use the development build, okay? Now let's build our application. I want to build my application and run it on my simulator. So I'm going to run npx expo run iOS. This is going to create an iOS folder on the left. And one thing that I like to do, since this project is auto-generated every time that we run this command or we run npx expo pre-build, let's go ahead and ignore it. So let's go to the git ignore and add iOS and Android. It's safe. Okay, now it's ignored. Perfect. Let's close this for now. Now let's wait a little bit until the build is done. Okay, and the build is ready. Now let's open it. And now we are outside Expo Go, if you notice. Let's just press continue. This looks the same, but now we are in our own app, as you notice there. So if I open this in the multitask, we can see Expo Go on the left, and I'm just going to swipe it away. And now we have our own application, which is this one. Okay, and everything is the same. It's just that we have all the native dependencies that we need, and we are building the application from scratch. And it's a fully standalone application at this point. Although it requires to have the server running so that we have hot reloading and all that good stuff. Okay, so what I wanted to show you guys is that if I close this application on this device, and let's open Safari. And in Safari, I'm going to paste my scheme and then say : So if I hit enter, this is going to detect that an application is installed with this scheme. Let's go to the app.json. This is the scheme. And since I'm trying to open this application, it's telling me, oh, the application is installed. Do you want to open this application here? And I want to say yes, this will open the application. That's how redirecting back to the application works. What I can do now is just go back to Clerk and say that the redirect URI is going to be this one. Now, if I try to add this is going to give me an error. And this is because Clerk is expecting me to pass a route, not only open the app, right? Because this is opening the app and that's it. And we need to open the app in a route. So the way we can say that is just by specifying index, for example, like that, and hit enter. Okay, so now if you notice, I'm saying that the redirect URL for my application is my scheme, and then the route index, which is going to be the entry point of my application. And it's totally okay because we're going to handle the navigation accordingly in a moment. So that's the configuration you need. Now let's go back to the Clerk Expo UI repo. We have really nice instructions here, and this UI is very easy to use. So the first thing that I need to do is install Clerk Expo UI at latest. So by running this command, I think we are going to copy all the components for the authentication. So let's stop the server. Let's close everything so that we are in a clean state here. And let's paste this command in here. Let's install Brian's components, hit enter, and boom. Okay, that was blazingly fast. And on the left, as you notice, now we have this components folder, and inside we have this Clerk folder as well. So let's go ahead and inspect this just in a high level overview. We have forums, we have sign-in components, and yeah, we have a couple things that are yelling at us because we need to install some pair dependencies. So if we come back to the README, let's install the pair dependencies. I'm going to paste this command in here, but notice that he's using pnpm and we are using bun in this case. So I can just change this to be bun add, and then Clerk Expo, Expo linear gradient, Expo linking, Expo router, Expo web browser. All these are pair dependencies that we need. Now, before I run that command, I want to show you that I already have Expo router installed and I already have Expo web browser installed. So I'll just go ahead and delete these two and hit enter. Let's see if we already have Expo linking. Yeah, we already have Expo linking. So the template comes with some dependencies that you don't need to install again if you don't want to. All right, let's hit enter. Awesome. Now we have the dependencies needed. So if we go back to, let me close the terminal, close this. Let's just click on the sign in. Okay, the warning is gone because now we have the dependencies needed for this to work. You can inspect this in a detailed manner, and we're actually going to do this later when we are customizing the UI and look. But so far, just notice that we have a bunch of components that we're going to be using for the authentication. So let's close this. Let's open the terminal again. And if we go back to the guide, it's basically all we need. Now you can start using it by setting up the authentication flow. And for each screen, we are just going to import the sign-in component from Clerk Expo UI. Same for the sign out screen, sign up screen, and all that good stuff. So let's go back to the project. Now we have made a bunch of changes, and I'm just going to commit everything so that we don't see all those changes at the same time. So I'm going to call this, I'm just say adding auth and commits. I'm not going to be publishing this, but now this should look cleaner on the left. Now we're ready to start implementing our navigation. We are using Expo Router, if you remember, right? So we have this layout, which is the entry point of our application. And so far, it only has a stack screen that is rendering the index, right? It's all we have. We basically don't have anything. So let's start by thinking about the navigation of our app. We're going to have an auth screen section, and then we're going to have a home screen for authenticated users. If you think about it, we will have public and protected routes. Public routes could be terms of service, authentication, maybe the onboarding. But for this video, I will have a protected folder, and then I'm going to create another folder, public. And I'm going to use these folders to group the screens that I want to protect and group the screens that I want to be public. In this case, it's going to be my authentication screens. Now I'm using parentheses since I don't want to route later. For example, let me give you an example here. If I want to, let's create an index screen here, right? So let me copy this and paste it in here. Now I have an index screen on each folder. Now let's say that I want to navigate to the index screen, right? So instead of saying app and then protected and then index, to access the route, we can actually just say app index. And this is because I'm using parentheses. Parentheses is just to define a group. It's not a route. It's going to be, you can skip typing the parentheses section. And that's why I'm doing it. So I hope that makes sense. So now let's define the protected and public screens. So the protected, of course, I want this to be my home screen and the place where my users are going to access the app features, right? So we can have a protected route like this. Let's say this is our home screen and that's all. Now for the public part, this is going to be my authentication. Everyone can access these screens, right? So we don't need to protect them. So let's just rename this to be Auth and hit save. Now I want to delete this entry point of my application now, this index.ts, because we are not going to need it anymore. We are now going to load either the protected or the public based on the authentication state of the user. We still need the route layout. This is the entry point where we are going to define the private and protected routes. So at this point, we can use Clerk to know if the user is authenticated. Based on that, we want to load either the protected or public screens. So the first thing that we need to do is actually wrap our component with the Clerk provider. So let's import Clerk provider. Okay, that's the Clerk provider. Now I need to specify a couple properties with the Clerk provider. First of all, it's going to be the token cache. And for this, we can import it actually directly from Expo, Clerk Expo token cache. Now in previous versions of Clerk, you had to implement this token cache manually, but actually now you can use it directly. And now that I'm actually using the token cache, I just remember that we need to install some other dependencies when using Clerk Expo. First of all, apart from this, we need to install Expo Secure Store. And this is because the cache, the token cache that you can see here, uses Expo Secure Store to store the user session. So let's copy this dependency. Let's go back and say bun install Expo Secure Store. Okay, now this should work just fine. Now, apart from that, we need to pass our publishable key. And if I go back to Clerk, I have my publishable key here. They give it to you here. Now, this is my test key, but of course you need to be careful with this. Don't share it. I'm going to copy it. And then let's create a new file on the left. I'm going to just select here and I call this one env.local. Hit enter. Sorry, it's actually .env.local. Okay, now let's paste our Expo public Clerk publishable key. This is going to be an environment variable that we are going to use. Now notice that this file env.local is by default ignored. So if I search here env.env.local, it is ignored. And this is because usually you don't want to push this to GitHub, right? You don't want to share this. You just want to keep this locally. That's why we are creating this file. But since we are not going to be sharing this on GitHub, that does not mean that my application is not going to be bundled with this value. This is a publishable key, meaning that it's going to be bundled on the application itself. And people from the world can download your application and inspect the code, the source code, reverse engineer it, and get this key. But at the end of the day, it's okay because this is a publishable key. But still, you don't want to publish this to GitHub since developers access GitHub and they can just use your key to develop their application and do weird things, right? So that's the reason why we are saying here Expo public, because we want to access, or we want to make this environment variable public to Expo. And by saying that, by saying Expo public, I'm able to now come here and say process.env.expo public Clerk publishable key. Okay, and hit save. So now this is bundled on the client. Again, this is going to be included in the application, but it's not going to be included on GitHub because it is ignored. Okay, hope that makes sense. Now we have this configuration. Now we need to now define the screens, right? We define protected and public, but we need to do that based on the authentication state. But what I want to do here is just say const equal to use auth. And this is a hook that we can use from Clerk. And I want to grab the is signed in value. This is a Boolean that is going to let me know if the user is signed in. But we cannot use this hook here since this component will need to be wrapped in the Clerk provider. That means that we need to somehow wrap my entry point with Clerk provider so that I can use this hook. So for that, let's do a wrapper. I'm going to create a function up here, and I'm going to name it root layout with auth. Okay. And then let's return a component that is going to be a stack like this. Basically this stack that you can see here. But instead of now returning the stack here, I'm going to return the root layout with auth. And instead of using the hook here, let's use it in here, because now this component is wrapped with the Clerk provider. Okay. So this is not going to give me any errors. This should work. Now, based on the authentication, I want to validate if we are going to show the protected or the public routes. And I want to also access the isLoaded variable. This is just a Boolean as well to validate if everything is loaded. So the first thing that I want to do is say, if it's not loaded, then return null for now. So you can do other things here like rendering a loading state if you want, but let's just leave it as it is for now. Now, down here in the stack, let's define the stack screens that we are going to be using. So we can say stack screen and then provide the name of the screen. And I'm going to have my group basically protected like this. And I'm going to create a new one for the public. Okay, that's how it looks. That's nothing fancy, just like that. So if I hit save and if I rebuild my application again by saying npx expo run iOS, and I want to rebuild since I installed some dependencies, just want to make sure that everything is installed in the native app. So we can say npx expo run iOS, and let's wait a little bit. So in the meantime, I want to show you that since we are using Expo Router version 5 here, in Expo Router version 5, they introduced a protected routes concept that allows us to protect routes in an easy manner. What I'm saying is that now you can wrap these stacks. Oops. And the app is ready. Okay, it's still working. You notice that it's taking the protected index routes. You can see it here in the header, and that's fine because we are not protecting anything. The user is not authenticated yet. But I want to show you that now we can do stack.protected. And this is going to define, this is going to wrap the screens that I want to protect. And you can have many screens inside this stack protected, but now this is yelling at me because this is expecting a property, which is a guard. We want to guard these screens based on whether the user is signed in. Okay. So if the user is signed in, then render the protected screens. Otherwise, render the public. But now we also need to wrap this like this. Okay, but now I want to guard the public screens. So I want to show the public screens if is not signed in. Okay, so that's how it looks. Let's see what happens if I reload the application. We are now in the protected index. Okay, so if I reload the application, you notice that we are still in the protected index. And this is because we don't have an entry point or a layout that is defining this screens, right? So if I open the terminal, you'll notice that we have a warning that is telling me we couldn't find the route named public, right? It does not exist. So the way we fix that is by creating a layout file. So I'm going to say layout.tsx. This will be the entry point of my application. The entry point for the protected routes. And this layout is going to be very simple. Just in this case, it's going to be the protected layout and just importing a stack. And by default, this is going to render this index screen. Okay, let's close this. And now I want to copy this and paste it in the public. In this case, it's going to be, instead of protected, public layout. Hit save. All right. So suddenly, when I hit save, if I take a look at the terminal and refresh the application, you notice that we don't have any warnings from Expo Router. And if we close this, now we are in the public screen. The reason for that is because we are not signed in. And now we are detecting that we have the layout, meaning that the routes protected and the route public are now valid. Okay. And now we are guarding against that. Just to show you that this is just a Boolean value. Let's say that I am authenticated. So I'm going to say true. And then let's set this to false directly. Now we are inside the protected screens. But if we go back to the previous validation, this is going to sign us out. Okay. And that's basically how it works. Now we have a fully custom layout for protected and public routes. So let's commit everything. I'll say add routes. Super simple stuff. Yeah, let's go back here. And now we can actually start implementing these screens. So we are actually right now in the public section. So for the public part of my application, I want to render the sign-in screen. And guys, this is the beauty of using the Expo Clerk components. So what I can do now is just come here, delete everything, and just render my sign-in screen from my components. Clerk sign-in. Let's bring it in here. Let's remove everything. This is all we need. Now, this actually needs to be imported like this. Okay. And the sign-in, it's going to take a sign-up URL as well as the scheme of my application. So if we go back to the app.json, let's search for the scheme. Let's copy this value and paste it in here. Okay. I'll do the sign up in a moment, but if I hit save, now we get the screen. So how awesome is that? Sign in to Numa, and even has the app name, Numa Video, which is totally okay with me at the moment. But now this looks amazing. Of course, this is going to keep improving. Like I said, Brian is doing an amazing job with these components. I would encourage you guys to support this project, start the repo, provide him some feedback. If you find something is not working properly, just create an issue and he'll take a look. Okay, that's a good way to contribute, just creating issues, letting the maintainer know that something is wrong. But it would be nice, of course, if you provide a nice issue, right? Like with screenshots, with a video explaining what's wrong, or a reproduction, right? How he can reproduce the issue so that he can fix it quickly. Just a tip that I want to mention. But yeah, this is actually fully functional. But before we test this, I want to create a new route in here for my sign up screen. So let's call this signup.tsx. And again, guys, you're going to love this. Let's say export default function sign up screen. And let's return, you guessed it, a sign up screen from the Clerk components. And this is going to take the sign in URL. Okay, so the sign in URL is just the home screen. So we can say / and that will do it. Let's wrap this, hit save. Okay, cool. Now we have the sign up URL, which is just the sign up route. Hit save. So let's press the sign up. Now this takes me to the sign up screen. And if I press sign in, this takes me back to the sign-in screen. Now, one thing that I don't really like is that we are showing this header. So let's go to the layout in the public and say header shown equal to false. Okay. What happens if I say true? Okay, false. Now, okay, this makes me come here, and in the public section of this screen, I want to say options, header shown equal to false. All right, there we have it. So because we have nested stacks, we had two headers, right? But now we are hiding the header in both, and this looks absolutely amazing. Okay, so let's test this out. First of all, let's go with the easy one, signing in with Google. Let's press this sign in with Google. This will ask me, this application wants to sign in. Do you want to approve that? Yes, of course. And I already have my account here. So let's select my Google account. Continue. And after a moment, I'm taken to the protected routes. That's it. I didn't have to do anything else. If I reload the application, the session is restored super quickly and works amazingly fine. Okay, and just like that, we are logged in. Now let's go to the index. You're going to love this as well. Let's just say sign out button, and I can bring this from my components. And I don't know why this is importing things like this, but we need to import it like that. And this is a simple sign out button that I can press, and boom, I'm now signed out. And if I reload, I remained signed out. Now, I want to show you that everything else works as well. So let's sign up with email. I'm going to use beto at codewithbeto.dev. And now I need a password. So what if I use justify content center for my password and paste it in here? Okay, let's continue. Now I'm going to get a verification email, and this actually works. Let me check my email. Okay, I got it. Oh yeah. So one thing that actually does not work is that if I paste the verification code, it only pastes the first number. So I need to type this manually. Room for improvement, right? So it's 0480. Okay, that's my verification email. Continue. We didn't have to implement anything else after confirming that we are logged in. Now we have a little warning here. It says the action replaced with payload. Let's check the logs. The action replaced with payload name index params was not handled by any navigator. Do you have a route name index? This is a development only warning, won't be shown in. Okay. So it is complaining because we are replacing to the index. Okay, home URL. The verification email component, and this is actually the beauty of this, that you can see the component and inspect what's going on. Got it. So we need to specify the sign up. Let's see. We have this home URL variable, and my home URL is going to be, what is it? Protected. I think that should do it. So let's try to do that again. Now, at this point, I can sign in. I'm going to say beto at codewithbeto.dev. Let's continue. Okay. Now, this is signing me in, and it's also asking for, yeah, my password. And I think it's going to send me a verification code as well. So my password was justify content center. Let's copy this, paste it in here. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I need to basically do the same in the sign in screen, I think. Or the sign in. Let's pass the home URL protected. Cool. Okay, let's try one more time. When I say beto at codewithbeto.dev. Let's go. Let's enter my password and continue. Awesome. So the warning is gone. We need to specify these properties. Of course, maybe I didn't really read the docs, but I think Brian has some notes about the components here that I didn't really read. But anyways, now it's working without any warnings. And if we go to the dashboard in Clerk, you'll notice that we have now two users, the one who signed it up using email and the one who signed it up using Gmail. Okay, awesome. That's cool. And now the session is going to be handled for us, so we don't really need to do anything else here. You can just sign out and everything works fine. So let's commit everything. I'll just say auth, add auth, commit, so we don't see that in there. And let's now close everything. Now, at this point, we have authentication working fine. And what I want to do now is just brand this UI with my color scheme and with my preferences. And since these components live in my local project, I can dive into them and change whatever I want. So let's open this button component from Clerk components. Notice that I'm inside this Clerk folder, right? And you are going to find these colors. He is using the Clerk colors. So I'm going to change this for a different color. I'm going to be using this blue. And this is a gradient. So if I hit save, now the button has my brand colors, right? All right, now we also have this link button that I want to change. And I believe that one is a text button. Okay, and the color is this purple. By the way, Brian told me that he's going to enable like a configuration file so that we can do this in a single file instead of going inside these components. Maybe at the time that you are watching this video, that's already available and you don't need to dive into each specific component. But so far, you know, it's just a couple lines of code. At this point, I'm happy with the result and it looks way better. If I go to the sign up, it has the colors that I'm using and it's perfect. Alrighty guys, our authentication is working seamlessly fine. Now I want to start creating the UI elements that we're going to be using for our application. Remember that this is a mindfulness application, and in the demo you saw that we have that little gradient that shrinks and increases its size and moves around the screen. So let's do that because we're going to be using that in our sign-in screen, as well as with when we have sessions with the agent. So it's going to be a reusable component and it's going to be super fun to build. So I think that's the best next thing to do right now. When we are working with nice graphics like the gradient that we want to achieve, we want to use some libraries, right? In this case, I'm going to be using React Native Skia. For those who don't know, React Native Skia is a high performance 2D graphics library that we can use with React Native. It's highly performant, works amazingly fine, and is not that hard to implement. So let's try it out. I'm going to copy the dependency here. Let's go back to our project and let's say bun install Shopify React Native Skia. Cool thing about this is that we don't really need to do anything else. Just by installing this dependency, we are good to go. So I'm going to rerun my application by saying npx expo run iOS. Cool thing about this as well is that everything that we're doing right now, it's going to work as well on Android. So yeah, let's go to the components folder. And inside this components folder, I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to call my component gradient.tsx. Let's minimize the Clerk components. Here we have the gradient. Let's export const gradient and I'm going to return. Oh, and my app is ready. Okay. And I'm going to return a simple view from React Native. Basically, I want to use this gradient as a background, right? For multiple screens like my sign-in, maybe the summary screen and the session with the agent screen. So this is mostly going to be positioned absolutely behind the content. So for the style here, I'm going to use the style sheets from React Native dot absolute field. This is going to make sure that the view is going to take all the available space and it's going to leave behind all the content. Now, if I access this absolute field, the implementation is actually, let me show you. Implementation is actually position absolute, left, right, 0, top, bottom, all that set to 0. It's just on a style at the end of the day. Anyways, once we have that, we can have a canvas. So a canvas can be imported from Skia. So let's import Shopify React Native Skia. I'm going to import a canvas, and then my canvas is going to look something like this. Inside the canvas, we can have shapes. So let me give this style of flex of 1, and let's create a rectangle from Shopify as well. By the way, we can actually take an example of a gradient, and I want actually a radial gradient. Here we have it. So as you notice, they have this rectangle and then they have a radial gradient. So let's copy that. I'm going to paste it in here. Let's import this from Shopify as well. And we need to import this vec function. Okay, so let's hit save. Let's see how this looks. I'm going to go to my index from my public, which is my sign-in screen. And let's just wrap this like that. And let's use my gradient from my components. Hit save. Okay, what's happening? Nothing. What happens if I put it down here? Okay, now it's on top of the content. Now the issue with this approach is that if I navigate to the sign up screen, or actually if I try to press, nothing is going to work at the moment. So let's try to remove it. Let's see if this still works. Okay, it still works. Let's try to remove it. And instead of putting it in this sign-in screen, since this is going to be tightly integrated with the form, I want to use it in the form component from Clerk, which at the end of the day is like the main container. So if I change this background to be, let's say, black, that's like the main container, right? Here's where I want to put my content. So I actually want to remove that background, and this form, I'm going to wrap it in this empty tag, and let's import our gradient from the components. Hit save. Okay, and we have a little error. Let's try to refresh. Okay, now everything seems to be working. Let's try to press the button and everything works. And cool thing about this is that we also see the radial gradient there in the background. But of course, this is not what we want. So let's go back to the gradient. Now let's start customizing this and animating this how we want it. First of all, I want this gradient to take the entire screen available. So if you notice, the width could be 300 and it's not fitting the entire screen. So what we can do is just grab the width and height from dimensions from React Native, get, and then I'm going to say screen. This is going to return the width and height. And then we can grab those values and use them in here. Width and height. Hit save. Now this is taking the entire space, and no matter which screen or device it is, it's going to always fit the screen of the device. Awesome. Now these are very ugly colors. I'm going to be using blue colors, and I have here this little object with colors that I want to use, basically white, teal, medium blue, light blue, and ice blue. You can pause the video and copy them if you want. And for the colors of my gradient, I want to grab my colors.medium blue to start, and then instead of yellow, colors.light blue. Okay, so notice what's happening. It's taking the array and it's starting with medium blue, light blue, and then from here we can go on until we get to colors white. Now this is going to have white in the rest of the screen, but then we can add more colors in here. So actually you can do colors.teal. Oops, and I need a comma. That's how it looks. I'm gonna say colors.ice blue. It's safe. Now my gradient looks beautiful to me, but of course I need to get rid of this background white. So let's see if we can find that. Sign in to. Okay, that is coming from here. Let's see if I have a background. I'll search for background color. Yeah, and we have multiple background colors, white. Okay, might be this one. Let's comment it. There we go. So that was it. Okay. It was actually the same form component. Funny enough. Awesome. So let's go back to the gradient. And now we have this really nice gradient. But we want to, of course, have control over this radial gradient, increase its height, decrease it, move it around the screen. So for that, we're going to be using React Native Reanimated. One more thing that I want to do here is add a blur from Skia. And this blur, it's going to take a quantity of blur. I can say 10. And you notice that now we have this nice blur on the radial gradient, and it looks amazing to me. And we can have a mode as well, like clamp, decal, mirror. I'm going to use clamp. I'm actually not sure what it does, but you can check it out. You can test all of them. Now, this blur and all the numbers that I'm going to be using inside this radial gradient, I don't want to put them directly. I want to abstract the configuration as much as possible so that when we want to tweak the values, we can do it from a specific configuration like this one. So I'm going to create this visual config, and my blur is going to be 9. So instead of using this 10, I'm going to say config. I already forgot the name. Visual config. Let's copy this. And let's go in here, paste it in there. The blur. Okay, now we have the configuration abstracted, and we can also use these other values, right? So for example, center is going to be width and height divided by 2. Okay, so now let's start by animating our gradient in the y-axis of the screen. To do that, we're going to need to use shared values from Reanimated. So I'm going to create this animated wide, use shared value. Notice that we're importing this from Reanimated. If you are new to shared values, basically allow you to manage a value and animate a value without having a bunch of re-renders. This is going to be highly performant, and it takes an initial value, which is going to be 0, meaning that I want to have my Y position at 0 at the beginning. Now, if you notice these vec numbers, so if I change this to be 200, and if I change this to be 500, oops, that's too much, 300, this is moving it in the Y and X axis, right? Now, I want to animate this. I want to animate the Y thing, this 300 number. It's going to start at 0, which is at the very top of the screen. Then we can increase its number 10, 20, and you can see how it is slowly moving. Let's put it 100 and 200. And actually, if you notice, when I put 300, I notice that I have also this background white. Let me find that background white. Okay, I have another one here. Maybe this one has been commented. Okay, cool. All right, hopefully that's the last one. Anyways, okay. So we need to animate this 300, right? Now I'm going to create a variable here called center equal to, this is not going to be a use shared value. Instead, it's going to be a use derived value. So use derived value, it's a function called whenever at least one of the shared values of or state used in the function body changes. Okay, and we can react or update these values to animate the y-axis in this case. So it says, lets you create new shared values based on existing ones while keeping them reactive, and returns a new read-only shared value based on a value returned from an updated function, updater function. Okay, so let's write this updater function. This is how it looks. It's going to return, and in here I can just go ahead and animate myself. Since I want to animate this here, we can just return that in here. But instead of hard coding this, what if I take this visual config dot center dot x? This is going to make sure that the x-axis is going to be in the center of the screen. And for the y-axis, I want to map this to my animated y. Okay, dot value, by the way. You can access the value by saying dot value. All right, and now that's my center. Let's put the center in here. It's safe. So as you notice at the beginning, it starts at the very top of the screen. And yeah, Perfect. So now I want to actually, from here, move it, right? From top, bottom, and maybe center of the screen. And I want to change or move it based on the user of this component, right? So I want to be using this component on multiple screens. So I want to handle the movement of this gradient based on my needs. And for that, a good idea is to have a position variable. So let's define a gradient props. So I'm defining this interface for the type that I'm going to be handling here. I'm going to have as well a variable is speaking. This is because when the agent is speaking, we want to animate some stuff as well, right? So let's also define the positions that we want to support on the y-axis. So I want to support top, and then we can move it to the center, we can move it to the bottom with a nice transition. Okay, so I want to pass these, basically these values as property, and we can react to them. Okay, so let's hit save. Let's now go to my form component. Now this is yelling at me because it's expecting now these properties. So I'm gonna say is speaking. So by default, this is going to be false. And then the other one is position, top. This can be center or bottom, right? So let's say top. Okay, let's go back. Now, if you notice, when I change this to be center, for example, nothing is happening. Okay, we are not animating anything. And this is because we are not using this position. So let's use that position to change the values. I'm going to create a use effect with 0 dependencies. This is going to run only once when the component mounts. And then as soon as we mount the component, I want to set my animated value equal to my target position. So this position right here. But this value needs to be calculated, right? Because it could be 0, could be, I don't know, 300, depending on the screen. So let's call here get target y. And let's pass the position. Now, this is a function that we need to create, and I'm going to create it outside this component. Let's say const get target y. This is going to be an arrow function that is going to get as property the position, right? So let's grab the gradient position. And it's going to return a number. Okay, now let's handle this case. I'm going to have a switch case depending on the position. So let's use the case where it's top. If the position is top, we want to return 0. This is because we want to start at the very top, right? Now, in the case of center, we want to return, and here's where I can access my visual configs again. Grab this center.y. This is coming, by the way, from here, if you forgot already. We're basically taking the height, dividing it by 2, and that's the middle of the screen, right? That's the center. That's what I'm setting here. Now, in the case of the bottom, basically what I want to do is basically just return the height of the screen, right? And then we can also have a default. By default, I'll just return the center. So we can copy that. And I'm missing the colon here, hit save. All right, now let's see. We are getting the target depending on the position when we mount the component. So let's see what happens if I come here and say that I want this to the center. Nothing happens, but if I refresh the screen, it appears on the center now, this case, okay? Let's put this at the top. I need to refresh the screen. Let's go back. Now, we are animating when we mount the component, right? Now, it's complaining because it's saying that it needs some dependencies, and I'm going to disable this. I don't want to know about that. We want to, that's correct, right? This use effect is handling the first mount. But apart from that, I'm going to create another use effect that is going to handle updating the value whenever the position changes, like the property and the value on Y. So in the array of dependencies, we can specify to run the logic inside this use effect when the position or animated Y values changed. And the thing that we want to transition here is going to be the target Y. So let's create a variable to know where we want to take this component, right? We can start at the top, and let's say that we want to take it from the top to the center of the screen. So we can get the target Y, passing the position that we are getting as property. And then once we have the target, we can transition. So I can change the animated Y value to be equaled with spring. And with spring is a function that we can use from Reanimated. Okay, I'm importing it. So I want to translate with spring to the target Y. And then, apart from this, we can also pass the configuration for this. So let's create a animation configuration part of our constants, like we did it here with the visual config. I'm going to create an animation config. And this is just hard-coded values that I came up with. And you can come here and tweak these values if you want, or pause the video and copy them. But basically, I want to set these values so that I can reuse them and change them quickly here. So we have this spring, damping and stiffness. So if I go back here, now I can access my animated config dot spring. It's safe. Awesome. Now we are listening for changes on the position. So if I go back and change this to be center, it's safe. Now we are translating the gradient to the center. If I change this to be bottom, now we are changing it to the bottom with a nice and beautiful transition. All right, and it looks amazing. So this is basically what we can do to animate on the Y-axis. Now, I hope that at this point you feel more comfortable on how to handle this, and we can move a bit faster on adding more values. This is only changing the Y-axis, but I actually want to change the scale of this radial gradient. So I'm going to create a variable radius scale, right? Because I want to start small and then we can make it bigger, smaller, bigger, smaller, and depending on what we want to do. So let's use a shared value for that. Now the scale is going to be 1 at the beginning. It's just like the normal size, right? This is going to change, but I want to also have a base radius value. So let's say base radius value equal to use shared value. And let's set this to a specific configuration. So same as we did before with animated and visual configs, I'm going to create another object here with my values for the radius config, because we're going to have a minimum scale, maximum scale, speaking scale when the agent is speaking. I'm setting these values here. When it's quiet, base radius, default width, speaking, I want to decrease the width by 4, right? So I'm dividing it by 4. And we're going to use these values in a moment. We can come back to check them later. But in here, I'm going to say radius config dot base radius dot default. Awesome. Now we are going to have as well a radius when we mount the component. So let's use another share value starting at 0. And this is because when I mount the component, I want to start at 0. Like you cannot see the radial, the radial gradient. And then we're going to increase its radius so that we have this really cool animation that it's appearing, right? Hope that makes sense. So what do you think if we start with the mount radius? Let's come down here and I'm going to create another use effect. And don't worry, it's okay to have a bunch of use effects. I want to run this only once when we mount the component, and I want to animate my radius from 0 to, I don't know, the target or the default value of the radius. So what we can do here, let's get the target radius. So let's call this function calculate target radius. Let's create this function. And let's create it outside of the component as well. So const calculated radius. This is going to be a function, a row function like this. Now, what do we need to calculate the radius? First of all, we need to know the base radius, right? This is going to be a number. And then we can also check if the agent is speaking, because when the agent is speaking, I want to have the animation like increasing its height and increasing its size and decreasing it all over and over again. So this is going to be a Boolean. Now, since this function is dealing with shared values, we need to say worklet here. By having this worklet thing, we're basically specifying that this needs to handle some shared values. And since this function is outside of the component, we need to make sure that we add this when we are changing the shared values. Now, when the agent is speaking, I want to decrease the size again and increase the size of the radial gradient in a loop, right? So I want to get the minimum value and the maximum value that I want to increase the size. So for that, let's use a function. And I'm going to call this function calculate radius bounds. And we are going to pass the base radius. Now for this, I'm going to create this helper function that is just going to return the min and max. And this is coming from the configuration. But notice that we are multiplying the base radius by the configuration min scale and max scale. So I'm going to decrease the size to be 0.6. And when we max scale, it's going to be 1.4. Okay, so we are defining this helper function that is going to return those values, just multiplying for that. And that is going to return the min and max, right? Now, we only want to transition from min and max when the agent is speaking. So let's grab the scale value and then say if it's speaking, then I want to set the radius config at the speaking scale. Otherwise, I want to set the radius config to the quiet scale. So it's not doing anything. And we can double check these values just by hovering. This is 1, and this is 0.6. You can hard code this if you want as well. Now let's return the min plus max minus min multiplied by the scale. All right. That was a bit rough, but now we have this calculate target radius, but this is now expecting me to pass the base radius. So the base radius is going to come from the config dot base radius dot default. And then we can say is speaking based on the is speaking prop that we are getting in here, but we are not destructuring it. So we need to pass this property as well, right? Then we can say is speaking. Okay, awesome. So that is going to return the target radius. Once we have that number, we can change the mount radius dot value to be with timing, which is another function from Reanimated that is going to animate with timing to the target radius. And we can also pass some timing configuration like the duration. Let's take this from the animation config dot duration mount, which at the end of the day is 2 seconds. Okay, let's disable this warning because I just want to run this once. So let's hit save. All right, so now let's refresh the screen and see what happens. Nothing is happening. It's appearing right away. So right now, nothing is going to happen because this radius is hard-coded, right? Now, we need to use another derived value. Let's create this derived value, and I'm going to call it animated radius. Okay, similar to what we did before, this is going to return the new value. So in here, what I'll do is actually calculate the min and max as well. And then instead of passing that, I'm going to pass the base radius value dot value. Okay, this is what this is doing is just calculating the min and max radius bounds based on the current base radius. And then once we have that, we can say const calculated radius equal to mean plus max minus min multiplied by the radius scale dot value. Okay, so now we're using the shared values in here. We're grabbing the base radius and the radius scale. And this is basically calculating the target radius based on the current scale factor. This radius scale is going to change based on the speaking state, right? When it's speaking, we want to have this pulsing state, otherwise it's going to be static. And based on that, we can return the mount radius dot value. And I want to return that if that is less than the calculated radius. So let's copy this, paste it in here. If that's the case, then I want to return the mount radius dot value. Otherwise, I want to turn the calculated radius. Okay, so let's hit save. Now we can actually use this animated radius instead of this hard-coded value. And let's hit save. All right, let's refresh the screen. And you notice that it starts at 0 and then increases to the target, which is the based one. Okay, let's check it one more time. There we go. So now we have this beautiful animation when the component mounts. Now we are actually not handling yet the case when the is speaking variable changes. So for that, we can, you guessed it, use another use effect. So let's call this use effect like this. And now I want to run this whenever is speaking changes, whenever the base radius changes, whenever the animated Y changes, and the position changes. Okay, so we have a lot of dependencies for this one. So first of all, let's get the duration. And the duration is going to be basically 600, right? And we can change this from our config. Then we can check if it's speaking. Then I want to change the base radius value. And we can use the with timing in this case as well, accessing the radius config base radius dot speaking. Okay, which at the end of the day is a number. It's a width divided by 4. So we want to decrease, instead of using the entire width, just divide it by 4, and that's it. Okay. That's in the case when it is speaking. When it's speaking as well, I want to bring the radial gradient to the center of the screen. So I'm going to access the animated Y dot value, and I'm going to bring it with timing to the center of the screen. So we can say get target Y passing the center, right? And then we pass the duration. Okay, this duration is coming from here. Awesome. Now this is when it's speaking. Otherwise, else, we can duplicate this base radius dot value with timing base radius. Instead of speaking, default. Let's copy the animation value dot Y with timing get target. In this case, instead of bringing it to the center, let's say that it was speaking, it was in the center, but previously it was at the top, or previously it was at the bottom. So I want to bring it to the position that we are passing as property with the same duration. So let's hit save. All right, now let me go back to the form and let's say that it is speaking. Cool. You notice that it was quickly animated to the center of the screen and the width changed, right? Let's say that it's not speaking, false. It's animating the radius and the Y position at the same time. And let's say that it was at the bottom of the screen. So let's say that it is speaking. It's going to go to the center. Once it stops speaking, it's going to go down. Awesome. Now, when it is speaking, I want to have the pulse animation, right? Smaller, bigger, smaller, bigger. So to handle the speaking pulse animation, you guessed it, we're going to be using another use effect. Now this is going to run when it's speaking and when the radius scale changes. So if is speaking, what we want to do, we want to change the radius scale dot value with repeats. So with repeat is another great function that we can use from Reanimated. We are importing it just with Spring, with timing, with repeat. It's a good one that allows us to repeat the same animation. So how do you want to repeat this? With timing, which is what we've been doing, we've been using. So let's access the speaking scale and we can pass the configuration for the with timing, which is going to be the duration. Let's access the animation config durations.pulse, which at the end of the day translates to 1 second. Now we can pass the number of reps to the with repeat. And if you want to be this an infinite loop, we can use -1. And finally, reverse. If you want to reverse the animation, we do want to do that. So I'm going to say true. And that is when it is speaking. Else, what I want to do is just set the radius value. Instead of with repeat, it's going to be with timing. So let's copy this, paste it in here, then remove this, bring this here, and we want to bring this to the quiet scale with the quiet scale duration. So we can say quiet transition, okay, which is quick. Actually, it's 400 milliseconds. And I think that I'm missing something here. Yeah, we had an extra comma there. So let's hit save. Awesome. So we have it up at the bottom. Now this is going to change the radius based on if it's speaking or not. So if we come here and say it is speaking, it's going to take it to the center. And now we have this really nice pulse animation. Now, just for testing, I'm going to remove the view since I'm not going to be using the is speaking function here. So let's just remove it to see how this looks. Okay, awesome. Let's go to the gradient. Now, the cool part of this is that let's say that we position this to the top. Nothing is going to happen because it is speaking, right? And when it's speaking, we hard coded it to be in the middle of the screen. But we have nice transitions, bottom, and it's going to move. So if you really want, you can actually have another animation that is changing this depending on the state. Anyways, so let's test the is speaking equal to true. And what I wanted to highlight is that because we are abstracting the configuration for the animations, the radius configuration, for example, the speaking, right? We are decreasing its size by 4. And you can, if you prefer, you can multiply this 4.4. At the end of the day, it's the same thing. But if you want to make this smaller, you can say 5, even 10, just to exaggerate. And you notice that it's decreasing a lot. When it's speaking scale, you can increase this to be 2. And now you have this bigger pulse, right? So we can even say 5. And now it's going to be very small, very big. You can say 10. And you can play around with these values, guys. It actually depends on you. But yeah, just wanted to highlight that you can come here and play with these values. I'm going to set the default. I actually spent a lot of time playing around with this. Okay, so now that that is working, we can come back to what we had before. And this is going to just have this really nice animation whenever we go to the sign in screen. Same for the sign up. When we change the screen, we are remounting the component. And when we go back, same stuff. So I'm super happy with this gradient at this point. And the cool thing about it is that we can use it anywhere. So if we go to the protected routes and let's sign in using Google or a quick access. Continue. Okay. I can just come here and use my gradient. And I think I need to put it here. Let's pass the position top and is speaking equal to false. Yep, this needs to be like this. Hit save. There we have it. Let's set it to true. It's speaking. We have that nice pulse animation. And of course, it's right now pushing everything. But if I put it on top, I think this is the correct position. It's now behind the content. And it's working really nice. Let's position it to the top and set this to false. Awesome. All right. Now, of course, I'm going to delete it. Just wanted to show you that it is working. Now, with this in place, guys, we're actually ready to start implementing the agent with ElevenLabs. So this is the fun part. Let's dive into it. Just one last thing that I want to mention, guys, is that one of the inspirations for the radial gradient was this application developed by Vova Codes. He's a really good developer that is building a really cool application. Let's check it out. I saw this and I thought it's really nice how they are animating the gradient, like right there. So that was like the inspiration for the radial gradient. So make sure to give him a follow. Actually, he's posting a bunch of stuff. And this application is a crypto app. I haven't really checked it out, but it looks really nice. And I think it's a great example of a React Native application with Expo. And you can achieve this, of course. I didn't spend a lot of time animating the gradient and all of that, but I think we have a pretty decent result with our application. Anyways, just wanted to mention that he's a really good developer. In case you are on X, give him a follow. And now let's jump into ElevenLabs. So as you saw on the demo, we now can integrate speech-to-speech first-class integration with React Native and Expo applications thanks to ElevenLabs. And as you saw as well in the demo, we can have the agent to call client-side functions to modify and run logic for us on the client side, like dimming the screen, sending a fetch request, for example, or just anything. And also you can configure server-side preferences to make an extra API call to get more context in the agent before even we start doing the session. And overall, the real-time functionality, everything looks amazing and works super nice. So now let's see how we can implement ElevenLabs in our application. So I'm here in their documentation. The first thing that I want to do is just search for React Native. And you'll find this React Native guide that comes with instructions, dependencies, and you can follow along here just for a quick example. And we're going to do that in a moment. But before I do that, I want to go ahead and create an account. If you haven't already, I actually already have mine. So I'll just press sign up and this is going to take me to my account. So this is how the dashboard looks. On the left, you have this creative platform, and this is actually another product, I think, from ElevenLabs. They allow you to change and edit videos, doing dubbing, sound effects, music, whatever you need for creating. But apart from that, they also have conversational AI. So if you click on that, you will find these agents, knowledge base options here on the building. This is like the developer side of things, I would say. So let's go ahead and press on agents. And as you notice, I already have an agent that I created for the application that we are developing. But if you haven't already, just go ahead and create a new agent and let's do it together. This is going to be a personal agent. Another cool use case, by the way, in case you're building something similar, is that you can have a business agent to answer questions about your business and stuff like that. So let's select personal. I'm going to select personal assistant. The main goal, I will put mindfulness coach. Of course, we can redefine this in a moment. Okay. And after a moment, we get our agent. So as you notice, it already comes with many things. But one thing to notice is that we have this agent ID. If you click on it, it's going to copy to the clipboard, and actually we're going to need that in a moment. So make sure to save that out. And let's just explore a little bit what we have in here. First of all, we have the agent language. One thing to notice, by the way, is that you can select the language that you want to support. In this case, I'll just go ahead and select everything. And this actually doesn't really matter because the model from ElevenLabs actually understands and identifies languages based on the preferences of the user. And as we saw in the demo, when I speak Spanish, the agent detected that I speak Spanish and it started the session speaking Spanish. So we can do that. And we can support many languages. So by default, it's going to be English. So if I keep scrolling down, I will find the first message. This is the message that the agent will say when we start the session. So right now, this is very generic. I'm going to go ahead and delete that and paste a nice first message that I came up with. And another cool thing, by the way, is that you can add variables. You can define variables like using the curly braces. And I'm passing the session and the username. This is great for personalization for users. They will feel like the agent already knows them, and we can go ahead and start the session, right? Now, once we use these variables here, I need to set them, by the way, in a moment. Let's scroll down. This is the system prompt. We will come back to that in a moment. And now this is detecting my dynamic variables, username and session title. So by default, we can pass a value here. So I'm going to pass Beto. And for the session title, let's use the forest path. This is like the hard-coded thing, right? We also have an LLM selection. You can change it if you want. Then we also have temperature. You can change a bunch of things here. But once you make modifications, make sure to press save. So for now, I think this is good. We will come back later to explore more things and add new things. Well, one more thing actually before we go, it's the system prompt. So in this case, of course, guys, you will have to write your own prompt depending on the usage of your application. But if you are following along with me, you can write something along the following lines. So for example, you can define the personality of the agent. I'm saying you are an AI mindfulness coach for the app Numa. That's our app. Numa is a modern mindfulness application designed to help you reconnect with your breath, stay grounded in the present, and cultivate inner calm. So that's really nice. I wrote this down using ChatGPT. But another thing to notice is that you can pass dynamic variables to the system prompt. So I'm passing the today session the same way that we did it before. Just by using curly braces, we're defining that this is a variable, dynamic variable. And we're going to set these variables on our application, writing code, passing the value directly. And so just here, you just need to set this as it is. And we're going to pass that dynamically when the user is using the application. Now I have here these two things that I'm actually going to delete, and we're going to come back later. Those are specific instructions for client and server-side logic that we're going to get in a moment. But for now, let's just focus on the environment, which is just defining that the agent is going to be speaking to the user in a peaceful space where they can slow down and reconnect with themselves. And then we also have the guardrails. Stay focused on mindfulness meditation. So this is going to prevent users from using our agent in a non-intended way. Never offer medical or diagnostic advice. Don't mention being an AI agent. And you can, see that we can just tell the agent, don't do other things that are not related to our application. Avoid repeating ideas. Mirror the user's energy. Response to unclear input if you're having it. Kindly ask for clarification if needed. And stuff like that. So notice, I guess the important thing here is just the session title, description. So that's our dynamic variables. And that's basically our prompt. From here, I'll just go ahead and pass as well a session description as default value. Mindful walking through nature. This is the forest path session, and we're going to actually create those in a moment, but let's hit save. that's basically all we need to do for now. We're going to start doing more complex stuff. If you want, you can just come here actually and select a different voice. The one that I like is Cassidy. So I'm going to select that voice and save. Cool thing, by the way, is you can just press play. And I don't think you can listen to it, but actually it's just an example of how this is going to sound. You can, of course, change the stability, speed, which is really nice. And I think this speed is pretty nice and it's okay. You can tweak this as you want. There are so many things that you can change here. But yeah, once you select that, make sure to hit save. Okay, so now let's copy the agent and let's go to the code. I'm going to open my environment file. And in here, I'm going to create a new variable for my agent. This is as well a public key or publishable key. So we can prefix it with Expo public agent ID. So let's hit save. Now we are ready to start installing dependencies. So let's open the terminal, clear it, and I'm going to paste in here the dependencies that we're going to be using. It's very important, guys, to know that you're going to have a better experience testing this on a real device. So keep that in mind. Also, this is going to work only on development builds, not Expo Go. And the dependencies are React Native, ElevenLabs React Native, then LiveKit React Native, LiveKit React Native WebRTC. And this is because this is using the real-time WebRTC standards, which is really nice. So we need to install all these dependencies: LiveKit client, config plugins React Native WebRTC, and LiveKit React Native Expo plugin, since we are using Expo. So let's hit enter. Okay, that's it. Now we can close that and we need to add a provider. So let's go to the main layout. This is our root layout. And we need to add something similar to Clerk with ElevenLabs. So let's wrap this with the ElevenLabs. I'm going to go up here and import from ElevenLabs React Native. And I'm going to import the provider. So ElevenLabs provider, this right here. Let's copy this. And now let's go down here and I'm going to wrap this component like that. This is how we can add the ElevenLabs provider. But if you really want, you can just wrap actually the protected route like this. And this way we ensure that we only use ElevenLabs inside the protected routes. But you know, this is an option, or you can just wrap the entire thing, whatever you prefer. I'm going to just use this as it is for now. And now we're actually ready to start the conversation with the agent. ElevenLabs actually has a really nice hook called use conversation that we can use just like this. So we can just call this use conversation and start a conversation. That's pretty much all the docs have. And the use conversation hook has many methods that allows us to handle the specific logic of our application. So we're going to learn more about that in a moment, but basically that's all we need in here. Let's go back. We install dependencies. One more thing that I almost forgot is that we need to add a plugin for the dependencies that we installed. So inside my array of plugins in my app.json, I'm going to paste this in here. It is a config plugin for React Native WebRTC, which is going to be in charge of allowing the permissions for the microphone. And we can specify the message here, allow product name to access the microphone for AI voice conversation. You can customize this if you want. It's just a string. And then I'm also adding the plugin for LiveKit with Expo. So once I hit save, let's go ahead and rebuild the application. But like I said before, guys, it's better if you test this on a real device because we're going to be using mic, speaker, and have the conversation with the AI. So for now, I'm going to stop using the simulator and use my real iPhone device. All right, so here we have my real device. You can see it here on screen as well. It's real. And if I move some stuff, you can see that it's happening there. I'm actually using QuickTime for that. In case you're wondering, you can use QuickTime to screen your phone. But now what I want to do is build my application on my device. Now, before I run this on my device, I actually want to do a pretty cool thing, guys. I want to generate an icon for my app, and so that we can quickly see the icon on the right? And to generate the icon, I'm going to be using Snap AI, which is a CLI tool that I developed myself using AI as well, that allows you to generate icons. And by the way, I'm going to leave the link in the description in case you're curious. I also have another video in the channel showing you how to create an icon from scratch. But just for fun, let's create a quick icon. The way you use it is just by calling npx snap AI and then passing the icon and the prompt. So I want a glass-like flower for my mindfulness meditation semi-transparent. That's just kind of like describing the application. And you can also pass the background transparent, but in this case, I do want a background. So let's go ahead and hit enter. And just like that, inside my assets folder, I should get the generated icon after a moment. I already have this configured. It uses my OpenAI API key locally, so it's secure. It's not sending anything, and it's going to return the result here in a moment. Okay, the icon is generated. Let's check it out. Oh my gosh, this is beautiful. And yeah, I want to use it. So let's drag it into the images and let's replace the icon. So I'm going to delete this default icon that is honestly pretty ugly. And let's use this icon. We only need to rename it, and that's it. It is actually already pointing to this icon in here. So it's going to be using that for the icon. You can also use it if you really want to for the splash screen. But for now, let's just use the icon. Nothing super fancy. Now I want to run this on my real device. So I'm going to say npx run expo run iOS. And then I can specify the device. The name of my device is Beto's iPhone 15 Pro Max. So if I hit enter, this is actually going to run it directly on my real device. Now notice that this is going to use my Apple developer account, and you need to have an Apple developer account to install development builds on a real device. And right now it's asking me to sign in to my Apple developer account. So I already have my credentials here. So I'm just going to hit enter with my Code with Beto account. And now this is going to sign the build it, and then install it on my real device. Now we need to wait a little bit, so I can just go ahead and minimize that for now. And in the meantime, we can start working on our application. So now the next thing that I want to do is go to the protected index. And in here we can start creating the screen for calling the agent. But instead of doing everything here, let's go ahead and create inside the components folder. I'm going to create a new folder called screens. And this is so that we keep this layout as clean as possible, similar to what we did with the index screen. As you know, this is just a component. We're calling it, and that's it. Sign up, same. So I want to do something like that for my screens in the protected. So for that, we can define the screens outside of that and then just call the component there. So let's create a new screen called session screen.tsx. And this is going to be the screen to handle the session. Oh, and the app is ready, as you can see there. Let's see if I can see my icon. Okay, guys, so the build was successful, as you can see here, but it looks like it's not taking the icon. And I'm actually suspicious because I didn't pre-build the app. So I'm going to say npx expo pre-build platform iOS clean, passing the clean flag. This is going to basically remove everything with the iOS folder and regenerate everything again. And let's see if that fixes the issue. Just to confirm, I want to check that the icon is pointing to the correct file. It's inside assets, images. Let's see, images, and then icon. Yeah, should be using this. So let's see. Let's try to run it again on my iPhone. And now let's wait a little bit and see what happens. Okay, so now we can continue working on the session screen. Let's say export default function session screen. Okay, so now let's try to focus on getting the conversation working, and then we can make it pretty and improve the navigation. So the first thing that I want to do is maybe just have a text, right, for now, so that we know where we are. Session screen. Let's close this like that. Now, like I said before, we can now start importing cool stuff from ElevenLabs React Native. Okay, so we can use the hook use conversation. And then, so here I'm going to say const conversation equal to use conversation. This is a hook that takes options, by the way. And the options are the methods that we are going to be using. So we have a method that we can call onConnect, and these methods come with some stuff. Like, for example, connect comes with the conversation ID, which is of type string. And we can actually copy this from the documentation. So let's go to the React Native section and let's copy this. Let's go back. Oh, and my app is ready. Now it's using the icon, which is nice. Let me paste this in here and hit save. All right, now let's see the icon. Awesome, look at that, guys. Heck yeah, looks amazing. Okay, cool. Now, to make sure that this is working, let's scan this QR code. I'm going to open my camera. Let me clear it and see. Okay, scanning. This is going to take me back to the application, and I need to provide access to the network since this is connecting to my local network so that we can load everything. And then I'm going to press refresh. Okay, now it's loading. And here we have it with a beautiful transition, right? Now, since I'm using my real device, I can shake it. And then this is going to bring the tools and I can press reload so that we can see that beautiful gradient. And actually, guys, this looks amazing on my real device. It's hard to see on camera. But anyways, let's try to sign in with Google. Okay, now we have the real deal. This is how it actually looks. I'm going to select my account, approve it, continue, and we are now signed in, just like that. Okay, cool. So we are on the protected screen. This is a home screen. Everything looks nice. Let's close the terminal. And now let's go to the index screen of the protected routes. And instead of returning this, I want to return my session screen for now and hit save. Okay, and this is working fine. We have the session screen text that we defined here. Now let's try to just implement a very basic conversation. So we need a button. Let's use a button from React Native. Give it a title, start conversation. Hit save. Here we have my title. We can add an on-press event. For now, we can say alert pressed. Hit save. So let's test this out. I'm going to start the conversation. We have the alert. Everything looks good. So to start this very basic conversation, let's create a function, start conversation. And this is going to be an arrow function that is actually asynchronous. So let's define this async function. And inside this function, I'm going to have a try catch. If we have an error for now, I'm just going to put it in the console like this. Okay, now inside this try catch, we can call await conversation, which is coming from this variable here, dot, and we have a bunch of methods, by the way, but the one we care about is start conversation. Start session, sorry. And now this is going to take configuration. Now this is basically just the agent ID. And my agent ID, if you remember, it's going to come from my environment variable. In this case, let's go to the env.local and it's Expo public agent ID. So let's put it in here. That's my agent ID. This is how we know which agent we are talking to. Okay, and that's all we need, honestly. That's it. Now let's create a function down here to end the conversation. End conversation, async function as well. And let's add a try catch so that we have a nice catch in case we have an error. Okay, and inside here, I'm going to say await conversation end session, and that's it. We don't need to pass anything to that. All right, so now let's duplicate this button, and this is going to be end conversation. Now, instead of doing this here, I'm going to say end conversation, and same thing here, start conversation. We can actually pass a color red for the end conversation. Okay, now I want you guys to pay attention to the console, right? Because we're going to have a bunch of stuff here. So let me make this bigger and let me, increase the size. I'm going to cover a little bit of the output, but don't worry. So now let's go here and press start conversation. Notice that we're getting a bunch of logs and it's asking me if I want to provide permissions. And if you notice, if you pay attention, the message in the microphone says allow Numa tutorial to access your microphone for AI voice conversations. If you remember, we added that in the app.json in the plugins section. This is where this is coming from. So you can customize this message. And of course, it has to do with something with your application, right? So I think this message is pretty good, but you can customize it and, just for the user. Now I'm going to allow this, right? And let's increase the volume. Let's see what happens. Let me bring the console, by the way. Okay. Publishing track enabled. Okay. So it looks like because this is the first time I'm getting an error. Okay, I think this might be failing because I didn't provide the dynamic variables. So I hard-coded them here. And let's try again.
Hey user, whenever you're ready, begin test.
All right, that was the issue, guys. So now check this out. You can see the screen there, but I'm going to set this very close to the mic so that you can hear what's going on.
All right, I'm here and ready to listen. Just let me know when you're ready to begin or if there's anything specific you'd like to focus on during this session.
Nothing much. Can you speak Spanish?
I can communicate in Spanish to some extent. Would you like to try a session in Spanish or is there something specific you'd like to discuss or practice in Spanish?
Español, por favor.
Entendido. Empecemos nuestra sesión en español. Hay algo en particular en lo que te gustaría enfocarte hoy. Podemos hacer ejercicios de respiración.
It's funny. Well, let's end the conversation. Now we know that this is working, and it wasn't working because I wasn't passing the username and the session title and the description, right? So this is actually a good point to start improving our screen. First of all, since we are authenticated already, we can simply grab the username from Clerk. So I'm going to say use user, which is a hook that can return the user. And in here, instead of doing that, I'm going to say user.username. Otherwise, we can fall back to the user, or you can hard code this to, I don't know, anything else. I can hard code this to be Beto since I'm the only user. Now let's commit this. I'm going to bring everything here because we have a bunch of changes. I'll say add ElevenLabs and commit. Cool. Now I want to actually bring some sessions, hard-coded data that we can use for, have sessions and pass them in here in these dynamic variables. So for that, I'm going to create a utilities folder in here. So I'm going to create it in the root folder. So let me just select a file and then say utils. Okay. Now inside this utils folder, I'm going to create a new file called sessions.ts. Now, this is the point where you guys get creative, but I'm going to just define an array of sessions that I came up with with help of ChatGPT. And this is just 5 hard-coded sessions that we are going to offer in this application. Forest path, mountain view, ocean wave, and you saw how this looks in the demo. So let's hit save. And now we also need to bring these images. These images, I actually downloaded them from Unsplash, and I'm going to put them in my assets folder. So you can do something like that. I'm going to put them in here. These are the images. So as you notice, they're very beautiful, peaceful images that you can use. Feel free to change them, by the way. But yeah, once we have that, this is going to work. It's pointing to the sessions, each image that you can see here. Okay, so once we have this, instead of passing this session title hard-coded like that, we can take the title and description from our data so that the model knows what's going on. Okay, now before we do that, guys, I want to actually change this a bit. My layout, especially the layout for the navigation. So if we go to the protected section, we have a little warning here. This is because we have the session screen, but this is actually going to be my home screen. And from the home screen, I want to navigate to the session based on what the user is selecting, right? So let's go ahead and create a new protected route, and let's call it session.tsx. And actually I can copy this, paste it in here, because this is going to return the session. So let me just remove this session screen. Well, I'll just call this session since this is called session screen. Okay, let's hit save. Now in the home screen, instead of having this, we can somehow iterate over the, well, let me create a view from React Native. We can iterate. So I'm going to say map dot. Oh, okay. So let me first bring the session, sorry, dot map. And then we can map for each session. And for each session, we can render a pressable from React Native with a text that says session.title. Okay, this looks good. It's working. Now it's complaining because we need to pass a key. Let's grab this from the session ID. It needs to be unique. And that's how it looks. So now we have multiple sessions. I want to improve, of course, the home screen, and we're going to do that later. But for now, let's just add a style. I'm going to say border width of 1. Okay, it's very ugly. And then padding of 16. Well, yeah, and we can say margin vertical of 6. So that we have some spacing, right? Okay, and this is what we have. I know it's not the best we can do right now, but now when I select one of these, we can navigate to the session screen. So let's use the router for that. I'm gonna say use router. And let's import this from Expo Router. Okay. Okay, so that's that. And then when we press this, I can say router dot navigate. And then I can pass the path name. I want to navigate to my session. And I want to pass some parameters. And the parameter is going to be the session ID. So we can say session ID equal to the current session.id. Okay, so let's test this out. If I press on ocean waves, for example, we navigate. Okay, this is working fine. Now, let me, of course, go ahead and hide this header that is coming from the main layout. Yeah, so I can use the same options here. Okay, and now if I go to, yeah, this is now out of the screen. Let's go back to the index. And you know what? Instead of using a view, I'm going to use a scroll view from React Native. And I want to access the content inset adjustment behavior to be automatic. Let's see, automatic, like that. Let's change this to be a scroll view. Hit save. This is going to push the content to be inside the save area, as you notice there. Now, that's it. That's how it looks. So now let's go to sunrise sky, for example. Now we need to do something like that on the session. So we can actually copy this scroll view. And okay, so yeah, let's go to the session. I'm going to use my scroll view here. Remove that. We need to import this from React Native. Hit save. Cool. Now we need to access the parameters that we are sending when we are navigating. And to do that, we can use another hook from Expo Router. Use local search params. This will allow me to get the, let me close this. Let me close this and this. So we're navigating from the index and the variable name is called session ID. So let's copy that and we can destructure it here. So let's see if that works. If I go down here, let's try to show the session ID. Hit save. All right, and it's hard to see. Let me add a quick font size, sorry, of, I don't know, 32, for example. Okay, that's ID 4. Now let's go back. Let's do forest path. We have the ID and we can now get the entire information based on this ID. Of course, you can add some validation here. For example, you can say, if we don't have a session ID, return null, or simply return redirect to, let's see, redirect to the home screen, for example. And this will prevent to continue, right? If we don't have a session ID, or you can just show an error that says couldn't find that session, right? But for now, I'm just going to delete this validation. Now let's grab the session by the session ID. So we can say const session equal to sessions from our utilities. And then we can say find, and we pass the predicate. This is going to iterate for each session. And when we find a session with the ID equal to the session ID, then we want to return it. Of course, this is going to give me an error because this is a number, so we can cast this as a number like that. Now, if you want to double check that we will always have a session, we can have a fallback here and say, just grab from the sessions, whatever we have at the position 0. And this is how it looks. Okay, so now that we have a session, when we are on this screen, we can pass that to the agent in here. So let's say session.title, session.description. Awesome. Now let's see if the agent gets that right. Let's do sunrise sky. Start conversation.
Hey, Beto. Whenever you're ready, let's gently begin sunrise sky.
There we have it, guys. So it knows that we are doing sunrise sky, right?
Yes, that's right. I know we're about to begin the sunrise sky mindfulness practice. Are you ready to get started?
All right, I'm going to end the conversation. We're doing great. Now let's start improving this UI, guys. I know it's ugly as F. Okay, let's add this in here. First of all, I want to add my gradient. Our precious gradient is speaking, let's say equal to false. And then I'm going to pass the position. So Hit save. There we have it. Okay, cool. So it's working fine. Now, actually, guys, we can say inside the is speaking, based on the conversation, we can access the status. So if the status is connected or conversation.status connecting, it means that the agent is speaking or we are in a conversation. So let's hit save. And now let me start a new conversation.
Hey, Beto, whenever you're ready, let's gently begin Sunrise Sky.
We can see now that the animation is activating when we are talking to the agent. Now, if I end the conversation, pay attention to the gradient. It's going up and it's going to be standby, right? Awesome. So this is looking really nice. All right. Now, since this is a screen that is not going to have a lot of info, let me actually just change this back to be a simple view from React Native. I'm going to paste this in here. And let's add a style, flex of 1, align items to the center, justify content center. This is going to center the entire content, as you can see there. And now I want to add a gap of 16. This is going to separate items between them. So we have that nice spacing. Now, I want to have the session title. So let's create a string here, and I'm going to say session.title. Awesome. Now I want this to be font weight bold. Hit save. And I also want to show the description. So let's create another text that is going to display the session.description. Of course, the size is going to be normal and the font weight is going to be normal. Okay, let's say font size 16, bit bigger, font weight 500, and then I'm going to say opacity 0.5. And now I want to change a button, right? These buttons that I'm using are the defaults from React Native, and they look not super good. They are not super extensible. We cannot style them. So let's go to the components, create a new file called button.tsx and export default function button. This is going to be my custom button, and we are going to pass a children, which is going to be a text. And apart from that, we can pass any props. So we can type this as pressable props, and then we can return a pressable from React Native. Okay, now I'm going to render the children here, but only if the children is string. I want to render that inside a text. So we can say if type of children equal to string, it means that we need to render this in a text. So let's pass the children here. Otherwise, it means that, let me bring this by the way from React Native. Otherwise, we can just render the children because it could be a view, right? Cool. So now let's go back here. And instead of using these buttons, I'm going to use, let me remove the import from React Native here. Okay, let's go back. And now I'm going to import my button from my components. Great. This is now going to look different because we can pass the text like this. And then this on press, it's going to be here. Okay, and let's remove this. Okay, what's going on here? Okay, let's hit save. Awesome. So now it is working and I can start the conversation as you can see there. Now let's duplicate this for the end conversation. And let's just remove this now. and call end conversation. Awesome. Now we are good to keep styling our button. So let's create some styles down here from the style sheet. .create. And I'm going to create one for my button. Background color is going to be colors dot primary. And by the way, I need to bring some colors. You can change the colors as you want, but I have here a list of colors. You can pause the video and copy them if you want, and just defining the colors that I want to use across my application. And by the way, I'm not using all of them. Primarily, I just care about the primary color. So let's use this color in here. I'm going to bring this from my utilities dot primary. Okay, now let's assign this style here. Hit save. All right, now it's working. Awesome. So apart from that, let's define a text style with a color white for the text. Hit save. All right, it's looking good. Adding horizontal 10. Adding vertical 4. Border radius 20. And just to make sure that everything is aligned, I'm going to say align item center and justify content center. Great. Now my button looks really nice. But one more thing that I want to do to improve this button is, have like a feedback or change the style a little bit when the user presses the button, because right now I'm pressing it and we don't see any difference on screen. So the pressable property actually has methods called onPressIn and onPressOut that we can use to style this button. So let's use state here to know if the button is pressed. From React, this is a Boolean. At the beginning is going to be false. So I want to say here true. And otherwise, false. False, like that. Okay, now based on this variable, I can validate if this is pressed, then I can add another style. Button pressed. Let's create this class down here. I'm going to change the background color to be colors.blue, which is a stronger blue. And I'm going to decrease the opacity to be 0.8. Hit save. Now, if you pay attention, when I press a button, now you can see that I'm pressing it, right? Because we're changing the style. I really love this button. And now this is good to go. Let's go back. This is going to start the conversation and end the conversation. Let's just double check now. This is looking good. Okay, I just started a conversation. Let's see. What am I doing? Am I calling the function start conversation? Oh, yes, of course. If we take a look at the button, we are not passing the onPress event. But actually, we don't need to pass it right there. We can just destructure all the props that this component is going to be used. So if I destructure that, then any other property that we pass is going to be called. So in this case, I can start the conversation.
Hey, Beta. Whenever you're ready, let's gently begin sunrise sky.
Awesome. And I can end the conversation. Beautiful. And you notice, guys, it's not that much styling and stuff. This is very clean so far, but I still want to improve some other things. Like, for example, instead of having two buttons here, I want to have one button that is going to have different titles based on week, based on if we can start the conversation or not. So let's start by defining some state variables. So after here, I'm going to define these two variables using useState as well. So just to know if the conversation is starting, because sometimes it can take a while, and then the conversation ID. The conversation ID actually is going to be used to get the information of the conversation, like transcript, duration, and all that good stuff from the conversation once the conversation is done. And to get that information, we are going to use ElevenLabs API. So we're going to make a call, get the info, and then we can save it in the database. So that's why I'm grabbing this in here. When we are starting the conversation, I'm going to first of all check if it's already starting, then we can return. Otherwise, I'm going to set this equal to false. So I can add a finally. Set is starting equal to false. And then in here, I can say set is starting equal to true. All right, and now this is breaking because, yeah. So now I can validate here is starting. Otherwise, end conversation. So let's hit save. Now, yeah, and it's actually, yeah, I need to put this in here like that. So I can start the conversation, and I want to actually disable this button. Disable it to be sure that the user is not going to spam this button and press it. So we can disable this if can start and can end. And these variables, we can take them from the conversation status. So I'm going to define these two here. The conversation status can be disconnected. So the conversation can start if the status is disconnected, right? Or is not starting. And the conversation can end if we're actually having a conversation with the agent, so the status is connected. So based on that, we can disable this button. Okay, now let's see what's going on if I start the conversation. Okay.
Hey Beto, whenever you're ready, let's gently begin Sunrise Sky.
Yeah, and now I'm not able to end the conversation. Okay, and this is because I actually need to have the same validation here. So I'm gonna, let me just refresh the app. Yeah, so now in here, I'm gonna say if it actually can start, then start the conversation. Otherwise, end the conversation. And yeah, instead of using here is starting, we can say can start. If can start the conversation, otherwise end it. Okay, cool. Let's see. I'm going to do forest path, start conversation, and now the button says end conversation. Cool, it is working. So the onConnect method actually gets the conversation ID, and we can get that and set it in the conversation ID by doing this. So this way, once the conversation ends, we can use this conversation ID to get the information through the ElevenLabs API. But now let's improve the experience of our conversation by integrating more cool things like client tools. Client tools allow you to call functions and have the agent calling these functions for you. And these client functions can be anything related to your application. So in the use conversation hook, apart from all of this, we can also pass the client tools property. Let me add a quick space here. And then we can define some things that we want to do. So when a user is having a session, it would be nice if the agent dimmed the screen, right? Lower the brightness to close to 0 or close to 0.1 so that the user is more focused on the session. So we can actually do something like that. Let's open the terminal, and there is an Expo module called Expo Brightness that allows you to change the brightness of the device. Let's install this dependency, and then let's rebuild the application. npx expo, I'm gonna say run, and then I'm going to run this again on my device. And then I can use this to change the brightness of the device. So let's create a couple methods here. Handle set brightness. This is going to be an async function that gets parameters. And we need to type this as unknown, otherwise we'll get a warning. And we need to return a value. So in here, I can say parameters as brightness value. Okay, and the app is installed. Everything seems to be working fine. Now, these parameters, guys, the brightness value, it's actually going to be passed by the agent. So let's type this as number. And we're going to configure this in a moment. But once we have the brightness value, we can put something in the console like console log, and then I'm going to add a sun and say setting brightness to, and then we can pass the brightness value just so that we know what's happening. Okay, and then we can call brightness set system brightness from Expo Brightness. Let's import that. Let's import brightness from Expo Brightness, and then we can use that in here. So to set the brightness, we can actually need to actually check the status. And I'm going to say await brightness request permissions async. Now, if the brightness status is equal to granted, then I want to say await brightness dot set system brightness async, passing the brightness value that the agent is going to set. And let's say return the brightness value. Okay, awesome. So we need to ask permissions, but this is all the logic that we need to do. Okay, so that's for to handle the set brightness, and you can add more things like that. But let's just keep it simple for now. And now we need to actually configure this on the ElevenLabs console. So let's go back to our agent. And now on the left, you see this tools section, right? And I have a couple tools here. As you notice, I already have this handle set brightness, which is our function at the end of the day. This one right here, this is the name. But let me show you how you can create one. Just press this add client tool, has the name, has a nice description about this function. So if we take a look at the one that I already have, handle set brightness, my description says, use this client-side tool to set the screen brightness. Then you can check the wait for response, then the response timeout, you can change that. Something important is that the agent needs to pass a parameter. This is going to be of type integer, and the name is going to be brightness value. Notice as well that this is the brightness value that we are expecting here. Okay, so we want the agent to pass this value to set the system brightness. And then we can set that this is required, and a nice description as well, a number between 0 and 1, right? This is important because otherwise it's going to get an error. So we need to set this between 0 and 1. And I actually took this from the description of the function. A number between 0 and 1, inclusive, representing the desired screen brightness. This is just a copy paste and I put it in here. Okay, and that's pretty much it. So once you create this client tool, you can go now to the agent. Let's go to the Numa video. And if we scroll to tools, we have the custom tools. Let's add a tool. From here, you'll see the client tool that you created in my case, I see the handle set brightness. So we can just select it. And that's it. That's my tool. So let's save. Okay, and actually one more thing that I almost forgot is that now we actually need to tell the agent to use the tool, right? So we have here the prompt, we have the personality, and then we have the context. And then I'm going to say, yeah, the context is fine. Maybe the environment, I can say before the session starts, set the brightness to 0.1. Maybe I can say 0.1 like that. And let's hit save. And now let's see if the agent does that. Now let's test this out. I'm going to start a new conversation. Let's see if the brightness goes down.
Begin mountain view.
I'm ready.
All right. Let's begin by finding a comfortable position, either sitting or lying down. Whatever feels right for your body in this moment.
Okay, but the brightness is too high.
Got it. I can help with that. What brightness level would you prefer on a scale of 0 to 1?
0.
Okay, I've adjusted the brightness. Is that better for you?
There we have it, guys. But it's actually supposed to do it when it starts. So let's try again. Okay, so I'm going to go back and change this a little bit. And I'm just going to tell the agent when the session starts, set the brightness to 0.1. But another cool thing, as you notice there, is that it actually did it when I asked it. So it's a good idea to let the user know that they can ask the agent to do these kind of things, right? Okay, guys, let's try one more time. I'm going to start a new conversation.
Hey, Beto. Whenever you're ready, let's gently begin mountain view.
I'm ready.
All right. Let's begin by setting the scene. I'm going to dim the lights a bit to help you settle in. Okay.
It did it. You might have not noticed it, guys, but it did it. Let's try and ask to set the brightness to 1, but I'm going to make my camera bigger so you can see better.
That's great. I'm glad you were able to adjust the brightness. I'm ready when you are to continue the session.
Can you help me set the brightness to 1?
Of course, I can help with that. There you go. The brightness is set to 1.
It did it. It's nice. Of course, you can find more useful things to do, guys. But yeah, so now that this is working, that's client tools. That's how you can easily get the agent to do what you want on the client side. Of course, you want to be careful with this. You don't want to allow the agent to do things that are difficult or charge the user money or something like that. Just simple things like adjusting the brightness based on the conversation or changing the color based on the mood or the scene. You can do things like that. Very nice. But on top of that, guys, I want to now mention that you can also implement server-side logic, not only client-side stuff. So if we go to the agent again, under tools, we have also these webhook tools. This is server-side stuff. So if you click on this, you can create a server-side API call and get information and provide that as context to the agent. So let's say that you have information about the user. You can have the agent make an API request, get the information of the user, get the history of the user, provide that as a context, for example. You can do that with a weather API, or in this case, we're going to be using a quotes API to get a nice quote and get inspired whenever we start a session. And same as the client side stuff, you can pass a name, description, the method of this API. Let's check this example of the quote that I have in here. The name is getQuote. Description is a function that gets a quote and use it to start a conversation. All right, so now I'm passing this URL. This is actually a free API and we don't need to do authentication or anything like that, but it actually supports authentication. So if you need to pass headers or an API key, you can set it in here. But right now it's just a simple get. And then you can also set the response timeout. You can pass the headers like I said before, but this is just a very simple get, and that's it. And it's actually going to get a random quote. Okay, so that's it. Now we can go back to the agent. Let's select the Numa video, and under tools, let's scroll down. Let's add another custom tool, and I'm going to select the get quote. And let's also update the prompt. So the prompt here, I actually added this important get the session. When the session starts, always set the brightness to 0.1. So that is going to do it. And then we can also call like get the quote, right? So for example, I have this from my other agent, and I'm going to tell the agent, hey, then use the tool get quote to get a quote and abstract something motivational or fun fact relevant for today's session. Now let's see how the behavior of the agent is going to change once we set this info in here. So let's go back. Let's start a new conversation.
Hey, Beto, whenever you're ready, let's gently begin Mountain View.
I'm ready.
All right, let's begin. I'm now setting the brightness to 0.1. Okay, the brightness is set. Now let's get a quote to set the tone for our session. Fear can hold you prisoner. Hope can set you free. Stephen King. A reminder that even in stillness, we can find the freedom to let go of what holds us back. Before we dive into our Mountain View grounding practice, is there anything specific you'd like to focus on today?
I would like to focus on mindfulness.
Mindfulness it is. We'll focus on bringing gentle awareness to the present moment throughout our Mountain View grounding practice.
But before you do that, can you get a new quote?
Certainly. Let's get a new quote for you. We need never be ashamed of our tears. Charles Dickens. A gentle reminder that emotions are a natural part of our experience.
Great.
How does this quote resonate with you?
Thank you. There you go, guys. So the session can continue. But at this point, I mean, I'm super excited because you can do any kind of stuff you need on the client or on the server. And yeah, that's that. Now, after that, guys, once we finish the session, what I want to do is go to a summary screen, right? And provide details about the conversation, like how long it lasted, the script of the conversation, how many tokens we used, and stuff like that. So let's do that. Let's go to the screens, and I'm going to create a new file called summary screen.tsx. And let's create a simple screen. So let's export default function, our summary screen. And I'm going to return an empty tag. And let's use our gradient, of course, so that it looks nice. But now the position is going to be at the bottom, just so that we have something different. And then is speaking is going to be equal to false. All right. And then let's have a scroll view. Since this screen is actually going to display all the script of the conversation, we can have a scroll view. And let's use the content container style to add a padding horizontal of 16. And then also let's set the content inset adjustment behavior to be automatic. Awesome. Now inside here, I want to provide, details about the conversation. And it's a good idea to pass the conversation as parameter, same as we did here. So we can get the session ID, like we did here with the session ID. In this case, we can get the conversation ID, right? Using the parameters. So let's do that. I'm going to get the conversation ID. Let's import this using Expo Router. And then we are going to get the conversation. So I'm going to create a conversation variable like this using useState. And the type of this is going to be conversation response. Now this type, I actually need to create it. So let's go to the files, and inside utilities, I'm going to create a new file called types.ts. Now I'm going to type the return type of the API. And by the way, this is a good point to go to the ElevenLabs documentation, and then we can refer to the get conversation details API. So if I just search for that, they have a really nice search, by the way, and we can use our own API key to get information about our usage, conversations, and all that good stuff. For example, you can see that we can get the conversation details, and this is going to return the transcript, the status, the agent, all this information that we can use to show that to the user. Now, to communicate with the API, we need an API key, but this is not like the agent ID that we're using to start the conversation. This API key, it's private and it's secret, and we need to keep it secure. So to do that, we are going to create an API route so that we can call that from the server. Okay, so a couple things to do here is that I want to grab this base URL. Let's go back to the code. Let's go to the environment, and I'm going to set my ElevenLabs base URL variable. This is going to be used on the server, so we don't need to pass Expo public in this case, just ElevenLabs URL. Then I'm going to have my ElevenLabs API key. And finally, I'm going to have an Expo public base URL. And this is going to be my API route endpoint once I deploy it. Now let's get our ElevenLabs API key. So if we go to the ElevenLabs dashboard, I'm going to click on my username, and then I can go to settings. Well, if you notice here, we have settings and even API keys directly, and we can go to the APIs key and you can create a new API key. So let's do that. Then you can restrict the key if you want, or just turn that off. But just be careful depending on the service that you're going to need. In my case, I didn't restrict the API, so you just have to be careful with that, okay? Then create a key, and this is going to give you this key, okay? So in my case, I'm going to actually delete this key. Let's delete it, and I'm going to use the one that I created before. So once you have your API key, go back to your project and set it in here. Okay, so I have set my API key, and another thing that I almost forgot is that the types, right? So based on the response that we were seeing there in the documentation, I had ChatGPT to generate the type that the response is going to get. So we can expect to get the agent ID, the conversation ID, the status, metadata, and all this cool stuff. The most important thing I would say is just the status, the transcript that we can use to the user. The cost is the number of tokens, and this is as well good to show, I guess, messages and role, right, for the transcript, so you can style that nicely. Okay, so now that we have these types, let's import that in here. Okay, and now we can get the conversation. So to get the conversation, I'm going to create an API route. In case you didn't know, Expo Router also allows you to have server-side code using Expo Router API routes. So we can create a new folder that is going to contain our API. And inside this folder, let's create a file called conversations plus API.ts. Expo Router requires that you have this plus API so that Expo Router knows that this is an API route, and we can bundle it accordingly and deploy it. I'm going to cheat a little bit here, guys. Don't worry, this is a very simple GET request that we are doing. And I'm just calling the conversation response type. This is coming from the conversation types. And this is exporting a GET route. Okay, and on the request, we're going to get the search parameters, and then we're going to abstract the conversation ID. So when we call this API, we need to pass the conversation ID. If we don't pass the conversation ID, we are going to return conversation ID is required. If we don't have ElevenLabs API key as an environment variable, we're going to return a response, ElevenLabs API key is not set. Otherwise, we're going to create a fetch request to the ElevenLabs endpoint version 1 conversation conversations, and then pass the conversation ID. This is the endpoint that we are hitting. This is a GET request, and the only requirement is to pass the headers with the ElevenLabs API key. Okay, so pass that in there, content type application JSON. This is going to return the conversation. We are abstracting this from the response by calling response.json, just putting it in the console to make sure that we are able to see it. And then we are returning the response, which is just returning the entire conversation with status 200. Another thing to keep in mind is that once you integrate APIs in your app.json, you need to change the bundler. Sorry, you need to change the output instead of static to be server, like that. Okay, make sure to do that. And now we can use this API. So to use this API, first of all, we need to actually navigate to this screen, right? Once we finish the session. So let's go back in here. When we end the conversation, I want to call router.push. And by the way, we need to use router. So let's import that from Expo Router. And then we can push passing the path name. In this case, it's going to be summary. And then, yeah, I actually need to define the summary screen. If we go back to the protected layout, okay, so yeah, I haven't created the summary screen. So TSX, let's say export default function summary and return the summary screen. Hit save, close it. If you want to customize the navigation stuff, you can do it here, but so far this should handle it very well. Now this is working and we should have actually autocomplete. Let's see. Perfect. And now we can also pass the parameters. So as parameter, I'm going to pass the conversation ID. So that then in the summary screen, we can get it from the local search params, and then we can use this ID to fetch the conversation details. But first of all, let's see if this actually works. I'm going to put this in the console. Conv ID, and then conversation ID. Let's open the console and I'm going to do a quick call here.
Hey, Beto. Whenever you're ready, let's jump.
And finish it. And as you notice, we navigate to the screen. And let's see if I can find the conversation ID. Okay, here it is. Okay, so we are navigating with the conversation ID. Perfect. So now the only thing that we need to do here is actually fetch the information about this conversation. So we can do that in a use effect. I'm going to first create a function called getSummary. It's going to do just a simple fetch, passing the base URL of our API. And this is an environment variable that we haven't set yet. I'm going to set it in a moment. But then we're accessing the API conversations, which is the API that we defined here. Okay. Notice that we don't need to pass the plus API to the path when we are hitting the API. The plus API is just for Expo Router to know that that is an API and not a route. And then we pass the conversation as the as parameter. Okay, that's it. Nothing else. That is going to return the conversation. We get the data from the conversation and set the conversation variable. That's it. Now I'm going to call this inside a use effect when the component mounts. So let's get summary here. And then maybe we can use the conversation here by passing a text from React Native. And I'm going to say conversation dot, we can just use the agent ID for now. And hit save. Okay. This is going to fail right now, by the way, since we are hitting a localhost API route. So I'm going to stop this. And what I want to do now is deploy my API route. Since I'm using my real device, I cannot connect to the local host. I need to deploy it so that we have an HTTPS. endpoint. First of all, we need to export the API route. So we can say npx expo export platform web no SSG clear. Okay, and this is actually going to fail right now. The reason for that, the no SSG, by the way, is just making sure that we are exporting only the API. But this is going to fail. The reason for that is because the project right now is not working on web. And it's not working on web because we're using native dependencies, right, for the WebRTC. So the way we can fix that is just by changing this layout to only be compiled for native platforms. So I'm going to call this native. And then I'm going to create a new file in here, layout.tsx. And this layout, I'm going to call it roots layout as well. It's going to return just an empty tag like that. And this is going to be used for web. And then this is going to be used for native. And now if we try to run the same command, this is going to work because web implementation does not exist, but now we can export the API safely. And as you notice now, the API is exported. Once you have exported that, we can deploy it to EAS hosting. So now I'm going to run EAS deploy production. This is going to prompt me to create a new project on Expo application services. Since I already have an Expo account, it's asking me, otherwise you need to create an account. So I'm going to say yes. And after a moment, it's going to ask me which URL I want to use. So I want to use the Numa tutorial URL. And this is going to be now my base URL. And this is it. This is my URL. And now my API is deployed with an HTTPS endpoint completely for free, so we can use it. Now let's add this to our environment variable. So back in my environment, I'm going to paste my Expo public URL. Make sure that you also have your ElevenLabs API key. Okay, so now our API is deployed and we have our API key set. We should be able to get this summary here. So you can also test this locally, by the way, using the local host on a simulator. But yeah, let's try to do this now. I'm going to start the server by saying npx expo start, and then we can say clear, just to make sure that we don't have any cache. I'm going to shake my device and reload. Okay, so let's see what happens. Let's do a mountain view. Let's start the conversation.
Hey, Beto. Whenever you're ready, let's gently begin Mountain View.
Okay, let's end the conversation. We get the agent ID and the API. Let's see what's going on. So the set conversation looks like it's working. Let's just put everything in the console. Conversation. And there we have it. So we have a bunch of data. Let me just use the JSON.stringify, passing this, then null to hit save. This is going to format the response, and this is how it looks. So as you notice, it's a bunch of data. It's hard to really read, but we get the transcript, which says, hey, Beto, whenever you're ready, let's gently begin with the session. So we can actually now display this information in here. Now to save a little bit of time, guys, I'm going to paste some components that I already have here. It's just text with some basic styling. So I hope you don't mind me copy pasting a little bit of code here. It's the text. I'm going to import a style sheet. I'm just defining title, subtitle, caption. And then we need to import some views from React Native. And let's import our button from our button. Okay, we're using router. Let's import router here. Use router. And let's remove this console log. Okay, now let's see. I'm going to remove this as well. Let's see how this looks. Okay, now I have just text, right? It's nothing too complicated. I got the transcript, I got the seconds that it took. But one thing, important thing to notice here, guys, is that the conversation is not going to be available right away. The reason for that is because ElevenLabs needs to process the transcript, process the conversation, especially if the conversation is, let's say, 10 minutes, right? It's a long conversation with a bunch of stuff. So in that case, you can check the conversation status property. And if it's not done, you can display something like, we are processing your call. This might take a few minutes. And then based on that, retry again. And please notice as well that you are not going to lose the information. It's just that in this case, my case, I want to show the summary right away, but maybe you just want to save the conversation ID and then check the conversation or make the fetch request later, like 10 minutes later or 1 minute later. That should be enough and you should have some data. But let's see how this looks. So I'm going to do another call. Let's do the Zenstones.
Hey, Beto. Whenever you're ready, let's gently begin Zenstones.
Let's end the conversation. And now you notice that it says we're processing your call. Now this is a very short call. So if I refresh, hopefully it's going to be available pretty soon. This might take up to 1 minute in my experience. But yeah, what I do is just spam the refresh button and now it's available. So right there we have it, the summary of the conversation. From here, I can say save and continue. And this is going to bring me back to the home screen. Okay, so at this point, guys, I think we are in a very good spot to start improving the UI of the home screen, of course, and then also start saving data and usage in our database using Appwrite. Alrighty, guys, we are getting there. Now, I want to spend a little bit of time improving our home screen because it's very ugly at the moment, and then after that we can start saving data to Appwrite and fetching data. So let's start by taking a look at the app example, right? So if you remember, when we reset the project, we saved these components that came with the template. And if we take a look, the default template comes with a parallax scroll view, and I want us to do that, guys. It's basically a scroll view that already comes with an animation that we can reutilize. And this is how it looks. It uses the reference of the scroll view to make an image big as you scroll. So I'm not going to use the exact same implementation here, but I want you guys to maybe reutilize this if you already have it, or if you are already familiar with these kind of animations. This is basically what we're going to be doing using React Native for animated, like in this case. So let's close that. That's why I saved it, just to show you that we're going to do something similar like that. So yeah, let's go to the components folder, and I'm going to create a new file called Parallax scrollview.tsx. Okay, I'm going to say export default function Parallax scroll view. Now this component is going to be used in the home screen, and we are going to have stuff inside this list. So we can use a children here. We can type this as props with children from React. I'm going to return a view from React Native, and then inside of it, we're going to have the scroll view. So I'm going to create an animated dot scroll view. Okay. And inside of it, we are going to have a children. Let's create some styles down here using the style sheet dot create. And then I'm going to create a container with flex of 1. And then let's add it here. Style dot container. All right, let's hit save. Now let's use this so that we can see the updates. I'm going to go back to my index. Let's import. I'm going to bring this from my components, and then we can wrap the entire thing. So a little trick here is that if you select all these, then you can press Shift Command P and search for wrap with abbreviation. Then you can just type Parallax scroll view, hit enter, and this will wrap everything inside of it. So that's a way of doing it. Let's hit save. And of course, we don't have anything, but the changes should be reflected now. Now we want to have an image here, right? Which is going to be the main feature session, the session of the day. So let's create a variable to get this session. So let's call this one today session equal to, let's grab it from the sessions. Let's bring that from the utilities, and then we can just grab a random number here. So I'm going to say math.floor, and then math.random, and I want a random number between, between 0, and between the number of sessions. So I can pass sessions.length. Multiply this. And this is going to take a number between 0 and 4. And then we are going to position ourselves in that position in the array and then save that session in this variable. All right, to make sure that this is working, let's create an image, the image that we want to animate. So inside my animated scroll view, I'm going to have an image. Let's bring this from Expo image. And inside this image, let's pass a source. The source is going to be today's session.image. A cool thing about Expo image is that you can pass a placeholder, but you need to have an image as placeholder. And I took this from the examples from Expo image. It's just a base64 image, looks like that. And then we can pass it here directly. So now we're going to render this image while we load the other image from the source. Now let's give it a style. We need to pass a width of 100%, and we need to set a height. Let's say 400 and hit save. Okay, and suddenly we have this nice image, perfect. But if I scroll, you can see that we are not doing anything. We are not animating anything, but it's working. Now this height, we're actually going to be changing it. So it's a good idea, since we're going to be referencing the same height, 400, it's a good idea to keep it in here like that. Let me remove the export there. Now we have this header height of 400, and then we can just say header height. Awesome. Now if I hit save, you notice that it's actually recalculating a new random session, which is nice. After the image, I'm going to create a view, and inside this view, I'm going to put some text and information about the featured session. So let's start with a text from React Native. We can say feature session, and there we have it. It's just a small text. Let's duplicate this, and now let's display today's session dot title. Let's do the same with the description. And then let's add a button from our button to start the session. This is a call to action. It's safe. There we have it. So it looks ugly, but we're going to improve it in a moment. Let's create some styles for the text. Down here, I'm going to create a style for the subtitle, the title, and description. And let's add them accordingly. This will be description. And for the featured session, we're going to use the header subtitle. Let's hit save. Okay, it's looking great. Now we need to position this on top of the image. So let's create a style for that. I'm gonna say styles dot header container. Let's create this style down here. First of all, let's say position absolute. Okay, this is going to put everything on top of the screen. Let's give it a width of 100% since I want this to take the entire space. And let's pass the height. Let's say header height like that, so that it knows that needs to cover the entire image. Now I'm going to say experimental background image. And this is actually a new feature from React Native. As you notice, it's experimental, but it allows you to use linear gradients directly. So I can say linear gradient, and this is CSS, by the way, to bottom. And I'm going to have an RGBA. Let's start at 0, 0, 0, 0. This is basically transparent. And then let's copy paste that. Hit save just to see what happens. I'm missing a parenthesis. Let's hit save. And let's change this to be 0.5. So as you notice, we have now this linear gradient that goes from black transparent with 0 opacity to black 0.5. And we can even do 1 just so that you can see it. There we have it. And if you want, we can start with 1, right? And now this is totally black, of course. So if we use transparent at the top, now we have this really awesome gradient. But of course, I think 0.5, it's a sweet color here because it's just enough so that the user can actually see the text and looks really nice. Now let's create a header content class. This will be for the actual text and stuff here. So let's wrap this in a view from React Native all the way here. Let's add the style, header content. All right, and now let's style this. First of all, let's say flex of 1, hit save. Nothing happens, flex. I want to justify the content center and align items center. There we go. Now everything is being pushed to the center, which is really nice. Now we can add a nice gap of 16, for example. That's too much. I'll do 8. There we go. Now I want to push this to be at the bottom, right, of the section. And for that, what I like to do is create some kind of spacers. So inside this content, this is taking flex of 1, which means it's taking the entire available space, right? Let's just remember that this is flex of 1. So what happens if I add another view here? And this can be a self-closing view like this. I want to say style so that we can see it. Background color, I don't know, red. Nothing happens. What happens if I add a flex of 1? Very interesting. So because this view has a flex of 1 and the one at the bottom has a flex of 1, now these two are getting 50% of the screen. But if I change this to be flex 2, now this is going to take 2 and the one at the bottom is going to take 1. So it's 30% of the screen and the red one has 66% of the screen. So what I want to do here is just push this a little bit. So I'm going to say flex of 1. Then let's remove the background, of course. But I think it's too low, right? Let's copy now another one down here. This is another spacer. Now this is too high. But you know, cool thing about this is that we can change this to be, for example, 0.5. Or instead of 0.5, just 5. Just play around with it until you're happy with the result. Let's actually add this inside this view. And this too. Okay, there we have it. So now this is how it looks. We are taking 5 here. Of course, this is, I think, too much, but you can tweak the values. For example, let's do 4, 2, then you can see the difference between them. So I think 5 and then having a little 1 at the bottom is just perfect for this use case. Now, if I take my device and scroll, you see that nothing is working yet. The parallax effect is not doing anything. So let's go ahead and implement that. So to do that, we're going to need a reference to the scroll view. So I'm going to create a ref here. Let's call it scroll ref. And then we can say use animated ref. This comes from React Native Reanimated. And we can type this as animated scroll view so that we know that this reference is for the scroll view. And then let's add it here. I'm going to say this has a ref, and let's pass the scroll ref. So let's hit save. Now I'm going to add a couple more properties here. The scroll event throttle, and this limits how often scroll events will be fired when scrolling. And we're going to set this to 16. And then I don't want to show the scroll indicator, so I'm going to set this to false. Now, a couple things to notice here is that we're going to scale the image when we scroll down and we are at the top, right? We're going to scale it. And then we're also going to move it so that it sticks at the very top. Because right now, if I scroll down, we see this white part at the top. So I want to translate basically the image to stay at the top. So let's use an offset. So I'm going to call this use scroll view offset, and we can actually import this from React Native Reanimated. We don't have to do anything crazy here, and just pass the scroll reference, and this will bring us the value that we need. Now let's create an animated style that we can pass to the image. So I'm going to paste a little bit of code here. It's just using this hook, use animated style from Reanimated, and I'm calling it header animated style. So I added a couple comments here. This applies the parallax effect. So basically we need to translate the image in the y-axis according to the offset value, right? So if the value of the offset is less or equal to 0, then we want to interpolate or move the image, and we can call this from Reanimated as well. So what interpolate does, it's that lets us map a value from one range to another using a linear interpolation. So we want to take the height. So first of all, we pass the number x, which is a number from the input range that is going to be mapped to the output range. And then we pass the range, and this is an array. So the range is going to be the header height and 0, and then the header height divided by 2 and 0. And then we pass 0, and this is because we don't want to transform the image when we are scrolling up, only when we're scrolling down, right? So that's why we're checking if the value is less or equal than 0. And then we also want to scale apart from translating the image. And what we're doing here is just scaling the image a little bit according to how much the offset of the scroll view, according to the value of the offset, right? If we are not offsetting the scroll view, it's going to be 1, meaning normal scale. And then we just grab these values and pass them to the style. So translate y and scale. This is just a simple style. And then I can just grab this and wrap my view, my image, with, let me delete this, with an animated view like this. Okay, and let's add this style here. Let's put it in here. Hit save. So let's see what happens now. If I scroll down, you notice that the image is increasing its scale and remains at the y-axis. So just for fun, let's try to comment that translate y and see what happens. Okay, so we are not translating, we're not doing anything. If I put that back in, now we are translating. But actually, I think I need to comment this. Okay, let's see what happens now. We are scaling, but you notice that everything breaks because we don't move the image to stay at the very top of the screen. And the same happens if we comment the scale. It breaks because we are not increasing its height and it's not covering the screen. So if I hit save now, this works really nice. Now I want to set this view to have only the height of the header, right? So we can actually pass an array of styles here. And let's just add it here in line. I'm going to say height equal to, and then let's take the header height, hit save. This will make it, more subtle. And then I want to say overflow hidden, just in case something goes out, we don't want to show it. Now this feels very nice on my device. Okay, and that's the Parallax scroll view, guys. Now back to the index screen. Let's start by styling this. I'm going to have a text here that is going to be explore sessions. And then let's create some styles down here. Style sheet from React Native dot create, and let's create the title class. All right, so let's hit save. Now I want to say font size of 32, font weight bold, hit save. There we have it. Now it's looking good, but I think it's too big. Let's use 24, and I'm going to say padding of 16. And you notice that I'm not adding the padding to the main view. The reason for that is because I'm going to have a horizontal scroll view for the rest of the sessions. Okay, so we already have this scroll view here. And now what I want to do is say that this is a horizontal scroll view. Now the items are from left to right. And you notice that we don't have the padding at the left. But let's fix that by adding a style for this scroll view. Let's say content container style. And just, we can just say padding left of 16. All right, and now we have the same padding, but when I scroll, we can see that it's taking the entire space available on screen, which is really nice. And I'm going to add a gap of 16 as well. All right, really nice. Now let's replace this style that we added for the sessions, and let's create a proper style. So I'm going to call it session container. Let's go down here. Let's create it like that. I'm going to add another one, session image, and another one, session title. Now let's change this pressable to include the image and text. Okay, let's bring the image from Expo image. Okay, so we're passing the source from the image that we are iterating. And then we're passing the cover fit, transition 100, and then we need the blur hash. Remember that I think we are exporting it somewhere. Oh no, we are not exporting it. So let me do that. And now I'm going to bring it here. Let's bring it in here. And then I can just remove it. There we have it. So if I hit save now, we're not able to see anything. Let's go down here and let's start styling this. Let's start with the image. Let's give it a width of 250, height of 140. And this is so that we have the aspect ratio of 916. And then we have a border radius of 16, overflow hidden, and that's how it looks. And now I can scroll to the right, and this is how it looks. Now, if you notice, we have the scroll indicator, which I'm not a fan of. So we can say hide, show horizontal scroll indicator. Let's set this to false. Hit save. Okay. So as you notice there, also the text is there, but it's really hard to see. So let's add the style for the text. This is going to be absolute because we want it to be on top of the image. We want it to take 100% of the screen, and then a little bit of bottom, 16, font size 20. You can tweak these values if you want to. Font weight bold, text align center, color white. That's it. That's all it is to it. And that's how it looks. Now, since this title is inside the session container and it has an absolute, just to make things clear, I'm going to say here position relative, which means that this absolute position is going to be aligned according to this container. So if I hit save, nothing is going to change, but now it should be referencing to that container for the position absolute. Okay, and that's it. Let's try to press on one of these and we can navigate. Perfect. You'll notice that I actually also pasted this view here with a style, which already has the same gradient that we created before at the top. And I can comment it just to see how it looks and then putting it back. We're basically doing the same. adding the gradient so that the text, looks stronger white. Really, really cool view, like a cinematic view. I really like it. Now, after this, finally, we are ready to show the recent sessions. So this is the place where we should, display and fetch the sessions from Appwrite. I'm going to scroll all the way down here. After the scroll view, I'm going to just have another text, recents. Okay, and now we're ready to actually save data and fetch data. So let's see how we can implement Appwrite. The first thing that you need to do is just go to appwrite.io. If you haven't created an account, just go ahead and create an account. It's very easy to use. Just want to mention a couple of things from Appwrite. One thing is that it's open source, which is really appealing to developers. I really like that it's open source, but on top of that, they have really nice offers and the pricing is highly competitive, meaning that it's really good. We just take a quick look. It's free, of course, to get started, so you can launch your project and you should be good. But if you suddenly get a lot of traffic, you can see that they provide many things just for $15 per month, which is, in my opinion, it's the best deal out there, I would say. But anyways, let's see how we can use it. We're going to use a database today, but you can use many things from Appwrite. You can even have the authentication with them if you want to. Databases, storage, functions, and let me know in the comments if you want me to create a video about Appwrite, any other topic. They have messaging, real time, and honestly, you have everything you need. So let's go to my dashboard. It's very simple to do. Just create a new project by pressing this button and select the region that you want to use. So as you notice here, I already reached my limit of 2 projects in the free tier, but let's use the one that I'm using here. It's called Numa App, which is the same application. As you notice, I choose the New York region, and I was using this for testing. So once you create a project, you'll get an ID, which is this one right here, and you can click and copy it. And let's actually save this in our environment variables because we're going to need it to reference our database. So let's go back to the project and let's open the nth.local file. Now, since I don't want to show you my API key, just go ahead and create a new variable called Expo Public Appwrite App ID. And this app ID is going to be bundled in the application, but it's a good practice to don't ship this to GitHub. Otherwise, other developers can use it. So be careful on that, but it's public for Expo, so make sure that you prefix it with Expo Public. Once you added the value to your environment, let's close that and let's go back to the project. The second thing that you need to do is create a database. So if you click on the left on databases, you can just go ahead and create a new database by pressing this button and then give it a name. In this case, the name for my database is NumaDB, as you can see here. And then it also gives you a database ID that we are going to need in a moment, by the way. So keep that in mind. Let's click on it. And once you click on it, you can create collections, as you notice here. And you can think of collections as tables because at the end of the day, Appwrite uses a relational database for their data. It's just that they are using at the moment a different terminology to reference tables, rows, and columns. They call it collections, documents, attributes, okay? But actually, I have some news for you. They announced a couple days ago that the terminology is going to change. So if you take a look at the Appwrite channel, if I press play here, in their presentation, they are mentioning that now collections are going to be called tables, documents are going to be called rows, and the other one is attributes are going to be columns, okay? So at the moment that I'm recording this video, this change hasn't gone live yet, but keep that in mind. Maybe at the time that you are watching this video, this instead of saying collection, now it says table, for example, right? Instead of document, now it's a row, and instead of an attribute is a column, okay? That's the only thing that is going to change. It's not a big of a deal. And also the new update is going to be backwards compatible. So you should be good at the end of the day. So from here, you can start a new table or collection just by pressing this button and type the table that you want to do. Then press create and boom, you should have a table like this. So if I click on this table, so this is data that I already have in this table session, right? But if I go to the attributes or columns of my table, it's very simple to add. If you notice, I have a user ID, status, conversation ID, tokens, call duration in seconds, transcript, call summary title. Now let's take a look how this looks, right? So when you create a new attribute, you can select the type. So most of them in my case are strings, but we also have integers for the token and the duration in seconds. So let's create a string. This is how it looks. You just give it a name. So in this example, I have user ID. The reason for that is because we are going to then fetch the sessions by user ID. So we're going to use that as key to query the sessions. So what you would do is just give it a name like user ID, and then the size of the field. So for example, I would say like 300 is more than enough. You can also provide a default value for the column and if it's required or not. So in this case, user ID is required. We don't want to create sessions if we don't have a user ID, right? And then press create, and that's it. So I have added this. You can pause the video and see what I have in here and try to add them in your project. Now, once you do that, you need to go to settings and scroll down to permissions. In this case, you can learn more about permissions if you want to, but since we already have authentication, only authenticated users can actually create data. So I went ahead and set permissions for create, read, update, and delete. Okay, make sure that you have at least create and read so that you can follow along. Now you might be thinking this is not secure because third-party applications might have access to this, to create and read, but that's actually not the case. We can go to the overview here and then protect our resources to only our application, meaning that our application can only access our API and database. The way you do that is by scrolling down and then press on Add Platform, and then you can select React Native. And this is going to prompt you to add the name of your Android app and the package name. And the package name, you can find it in the app.json. So for Android, it's the same one as iOS, as you can see here. So just copy this value, then come back and create your app for iOS and Android. Once you do that, you should see something like this with your bundle identifier. Okay, so now my application is the only one that can do stuff in my database, which is great. And by the way, I would recommend that you create a document or a row here, just so that we have some dummy data for you to fetch. You can copy the user ID from Clerk, the status, conversation ID, and then create a new record here. And once you have a record, we can start integrating it in our application. So let's go back to the app. We're going to need to install a couple dependencies. So let's open the terminal, and I'm going to install the React Native SDK for Appwrite. You can run npx expo install React Native Appwrite, and a pair dependency is going to be React Native URL polyfill. We just need these two dependencies. And by the way, all the dependencies and resources for the project are going to be available at codewithbeto.dev. I'm going to leave the link in the description in case you want to follow along the structure and copy paste the dependencies that you need to install. You can go there and follow along there. So let's hit enter. This is going to install these two. And once that is done, we can restart the server by saying npx expo start, hit enter. Now it's running again. Just to make sure that everything is working, I'm going to shake my device and reload. Okay, everything is working. And as you notice there, we have the nice transition from the blur image to the original image. Now let's close the app.json, and we need to connect to the database using Appwrite. So in my utilities folder, I'm going to create a new file called appwrite.ts. This file is going to contain the configuration for Appwrite. So I'm going to import from React Native Appwrite the client, the database, and models. This is so that we have type safety with our collection. Now this is where we're going to need our app ID. So I'm going to grab this from my Expo public Appwrite ID. So I'm just adding a quick check. If we don't have the environment variable, then we're going to throw an error. Now let's define some constant values here. I'm going to paste this in here. First of all, we need our project ID, our bundle identifier for my application. Okay, so this is my bundle ID. Then we need our database ID. So I just copy pasted my database ID. You can get yours just by going to the databases and click on this ID that you can see here. Just click on it and bring it here, paste it in here, and that's that. You need to do the same for the collection ID or table. In this case, if we click on it, this is the only table that we have. It's called session, and we can click to copy and paste it in here. Now, remember that Appwrite is changing the terminology, so it's not going to be collection, it's going to be table in the future. And for your reference, I'm going to leave a comment here. The TLDR is that collections will be called tables, documents will be called rows, attributes will be called columns. This example uses the old terminology, will be backwards compatible, but in the future, just change the name if you are following along. Now I'm going to define the settings of my project. The configuration is just an object. It's called Appwrite config, and we need to set the endpoint, the project ID, the platform, database, and tables. And I'm actually calling it tables, but previously you could have something like calls, right? But this is actually custom, and I'm calling it tables and then passing the table session. Just identifying this as my collection ID and setting all the values in here. Now the endpoint, you can actually get it from Appwrite as well. It depends on where you are hosting your backend. In my case, I choose New York City. That's why I need to say NYC here. But you can get yours just by going to Appwrite, go to the settings on the left at the bottom, and in the settings, you'll find your project ID and endpoint. As you notice is NYC. This is what I have there. So once we have all the configuration that we need, I'm going to create a new client and then set the endpoint, set the project, and set the platform. Just grabbing this from my configuration that we just created. Now let's start a new instance of our database. We can do that just by calling new database and passing the client. And finally, I'm going to export my configuration. We're going to need it to make queries, the client, and the database. Now, to enjoy the type safety when we fetch sessions and have everything typed nicely, we can create an interface called session and then extend this from, so I'm going to say extends from models, dot, and this is a document, right? At the end of the day, and a document actually comes with something. So if I click on it, it comes with an ID, sequence, collection ID, information about the database, when it was created, updated. But on top of that, if you remember, we defined some fields, right, for this model, also known as columns, right? So I'm going to paste them in here. If you remember, we define a user, we define a status, we define a conversation ID, token, and basically I took this from my collection. So if we go back to my database, and let's select the session. These are the attributes. Just copy that and type it in here. Same thing, just make sure that you have consistency. So for example, tokens is optional number. And here I have tokens, which is actually has a default value to 0, and it's a number. Call duration is a number. Everything else is a string. And as you notice, some of them are optional. So that's that. Then we can use this type in when we fetch data and then type the results. So now let's go to the index screen and we can start fetching the data. Let's create a variable called session history and set session history using useState from React. This is going to be an array. And I'm going to type this as session from my utilities. Okay, we can say that this is an array as well. Now let's create a function to fetch the sessions. So I'm going to say const fetch sessions. This is an async function. And let's create a try catch. If we have an error, let's just put it in the console. And inside the try, we can have the actual logic. Let's say const equal to await. Let's bring our database from the configuration. So this is coming from Appwrite, as you can see here. And I'm going to say dot list documents. This is how you can do queries. If you notice as well, you have many things that you can do, like get document, just one document, but in this case, I want a list, right? So I'm going to say list documents. Now this is expecting the database ID. So we can take that from the Appwrite config.db. Next, we need to specify the collection ID. Let's put this down here. Let's say Appwrite.tables.session. That's my collection, also known as table. Then it requires the query. So let's pass a query here. We can import query from Appwrite dot, then I can say equal, right? We can do all kinds of queries, as you can see here. Ends with, contains, between, but in this case, I want to do an equal. And the field that I'm looking for is the user ID. This is the attribute, and the value is the user ID. So let's take the user from Clerk. I'm gonna say const equal to use user from Clerk, and this comes with the user in here. So now I can say user.id. Now this is giving me a warning because could be that this is null, right? So to fix that, we can have a validation here. If we don't have a user, just return. And we can have an alert that says no user found. It's safe. Right? So now the warning is gone and this query should work. And by the way, this is actually going to return documents, the list of documents. Once we have the documents, we can set the session history, passing the documents. Now TypeScript is going to start yelling at me. So let's pass this as session, right? Now, this is an unknown type. So let's type it as unknown, otherwise as session, and this should do it. Now, if I try to access the session history, it should be fully typed. So let's now call this when the component mounts using a use effect. I want to run this just once, and let's call this fetch sessions. And before I hit save, let's open the terminal. Let's clear it. So if I hit save, nothing happens. And because we are not actually displaying anything yet, let's come here and I'm going to say console log documents. Hit save. All right. And we don't have data. This is an empty array. And this is actually expected because this is a different user from my other application. Although I have a bunch of data in the table, we're not displaying anything because this user hasn't saved anything. So what I could do is just go to Appwrite and create a document. But actually, let's do that when we finish a session. So let's go to the session screen. So if you remember, we have the save and continue. Let's go ahead and create a session, right? Let's start this. Let's start a session. Let's say forest path. And I'm going to say start conversation.
Hey, Beto. Whenever you're ready, let's gently begin forest path.
And I'm going to finish this quickly. Okay, so we have this refresh and then save and continue. The save and continue is just dismissing everything, as you can see here. So let's create a proper function here that is going to handle dismissing the screens and then saving the record in our database once the user finished the conversation. So let's add a try catch as well. If in the case we have an error, we're going to put in the console. Okay, and now inside the try, we can save the data. So let's say await database. Let's bring that from Appwrite. Create document. We need to pass the database ID. So let's bring the Appwrite config.db, aka table. So I'm going to say Appwrite.tables. This is going to be a session. And then the document ID. So we can create an ID by importing the React Native, the ID from React Native Appwrite dot unique. This will ensure that the ID for this document is unique. And then we can pass the data. So this is going to be an object, and we can just map whatever data we want to save from Appwrite, right? The conversation comes with a bunch of metadata that we actually don't need, unless you want to, right? But I'm just gonna save the fields that I care about, like the user ID, the status, the conversation ID, the token, call duration, and notice that I'm casting these as numbers, right? The transcript, I'm getting these from the conversation as well, and the summary title. So once I have that, I also need to bring the user so that we know who created this session, right? So who had the conversation. So I'm gonna say const user. Let's use user from Clerk. And now down here, I can say user.id. Perfect. Now, once we save the data, I want to dismiss the screens. I'm gonna say router, dismiss all, call this function, and that's it. Now, just to be a little bit more fancy, we can have a loading state. Let's create a variable. I'm gonna call it isSaving, and then set is saving. Let's use useState equal to false at the beginning, and when we start the transaction, we can say set isSaving equal to true. And then once we finish here, either error or no, we can say finally set isSaving equal to false. All right, now let's call this function down here when the user presses save and continue. Right here. Let's delete this, call this function, hit save. And by the way, now that everything is ready, I can press now save and continue. Let's just make sure that we are doing everything correctly here. This looks good to me. By the way, I want to say here, we can have a validation that says is saving. We can say saving. Otherwise, we can have the save and continue text. So let's put it in here. Now check this out. Let's see what happens. Oh, yeah, this is not correct. Okay, there we go. So I'm gonna press save and continue. We should be able to see the loading state, and then it's going to take me back. Awesome. So it did it. Now, of course, we don't have anything here, and that is because we need to refetch everything, right? So let's go back to the index. I actually want to add the refresh button. We already have the fetch sessions function, right? So we can simply create here a pressable that is going to call the same function. And let's give it an icon. I'm going to import this from Expo Vector Icons. And then let's bring the colors from the utilities and primary. Now, if I hit save now, this is actually going to re-render and fetch. So let's see what happens. Okay, now let's check the console. And as you notice, we have now data. Okay, really nice. Now, if you want, we can display the data nicely in the console by saying json.stringify, passing the documents null to. Okay, hit save. Let's see how this looks. So this is an array, as you notice, and the object comes with the document fields, which is the ID, created at, updated at, and then the actual data, which is the user ID, the status, and stuff. Now we need to display this data, of course. So what I'll do is that I'm going to align the recent and this button from left to right. So let's wrap this in a view and give it a flex direction row, justify content space between, and align item center. So that we have this really nice, horizontal row. Notice that I'm adding this padding right of 16 to be consistent and having a space. And then after this, we can have actually another view that is going to render the items. Now, first of all, what I want to say is access the session history dot length, right? If this is greater than 0, otherwise I'm going to add another parenthesis. Now in here, I want to map over the session history. So let's say map, and then we can iterate over each session and then return a text for now. And this text is going to render the session dot, let's call summary title. Okay, let's give it a key, which is going to be the session.id. Okay, and everything is fully typed, as you notice. Otherwise, I'm going to have a empty state, right? So we can have just a simple text that is going to say no session found. Let's hit save. Now we already have a session and it's there, which is really exciting. Now I'm going to create a component that is going to render a card for each session history. Let's do it down here. I'm going to paste a little bit of code for this card, but it's a very simple component actually. It's called session card and it's going to take the session as property. Now we're using use memo to memoize an emoji, and this is a random emoji that I'm taking from this list. This is so that we have a nice image for, like a visual for the card. Then I also have this state to track if the card is expanded or not. Then just a simple view. We have the emoji, then we have the title. Then if the card is expanded, I'm showing the button to show less. This is going to set expanded equal to false. And then of course we're showing the transcript if it's expanded. Otherwise, we're just going to show this read more button. After that, I have the tokens that were utilized for the session as well as the duration of the session. And then I'm displaying the day of the session. We can access the day just by transforming the created at to date and then passing the local date string and the weekday long, and that's it. So now if I render this component here instead of this text, let's call it like this. Let's pass the key as well. And this is of course expecting the session like that. Let's hit save. That's how we can, style it. Of course, you can make it look better, but if I press read more, it shows the transcript, which is really nice. And we can create one that is longer, right? So let's do this one.
Hey, Beto. Whenever you're ready, let's gently begin Sunrise Sky.
Hey, I'm ready.
All right, let's begin. I'm now setting the brightness to 0.1. Okay, the brightness is set. Now let's get a quote to set the tone for our session. There is a cosmic law which says that every satisfaction must be paid for with a dissatisfaction.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I'm going to end it there. Otherwise, it's going to be very long. Now let's wait a little bit until this is done and then we can save it. And it's ready. By the way, it's also worth noting, guys, that if I go ahead and press save and continue while the session is being processed, we're still going to save the conversation ID. And even if we don't have the transcript yet, later we can refresh by conversation ID and repopulate the data in Appwrite if you want to. That's actually a good exercise for you. But anyways, this is a long transcript as you can see here. And let's just press save and continue. It was saved. Now let's try to test our refresh button. I'm going to press it and boom, we have it there. Okay, and as you notice, there's a couple of details in here. The app looks beautiful, but we need a gap between these items. And then we also need some space at the bottom, right? Let's do that. So this is rendering the list. I'm going to add a style gap of 16. Hit save. Now we have this nice spacing. And then after this, I actually want to have the authenticated user card. Of course, you can create a screen for the profile, but just to keep things simple, I want to display it here as well. So let's create a simple view for the authenticated user. We are reutilizing everything basically, the account title, That's how it looks. We have this view that is just a simple card, giving it a background color white, giving the 16 spacing and a little bit of gap between the items, just displaying the user first name, last name, email address, and the image, of course, because we're using Google. So we have the image. It's nice to have it there. And then I'm using the sign out button from the Clerk components, as you can see there. And this is now working really nice because on top of that, I'm adding a margin bottom of 100 so that we have a nice spacing at the end, right? It's good that we have some space right there. If I press sign out, this is going to take me out. Let's try to sign in again with Google to do it quickly. There we go. Continue. And boom. We have the nice transition with the images. I really like that. We can check the sessions, see the history, read more, analyze about my session, my mindfulness. Everything is really nice. Now from here, I would encourage you to check my other video where I implemented more advanced stuff with Appwrite and Clerk. I'm going to leave the link in the description. So that's our complete mindfulness application. We set up authentication with Clerk using Expo Router's protected routes, saved session data with Appwrite, and brought the AI agent to life with ElevenLabs, all wrapped in a UI powered by Reanimated and Skia. If you want to take this stack even further, I made another video where I implemented passkeys with Clerk and real-time updates with Appwrite. I'll leave the link in the description. Maybe add new client tools, different animations, or even expand the database features. Drop your ideas in the comments. I would love to see what you come up with. If this video helped, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with a friend building with React Native. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.